All right, folks, let's jump into the breakdown of the great allegorical film Matrix Resurrections, the fourth installment of this franchise of films. And as I said last week, folks, we have to understand these films as spiritual allegories because that is, in fact, and indeed what they are. And many people still don't understand that that's what these films are. So just as a very brief review, looking into how I broke down the original trilogy, which was called the Matrix Trilogy Decoded. It's actually by far my most popular presentation online, believe it or not. It has the most views, even more than my natural law seminar. And you could get a hard copy of it on DVD or flash drive at What on Earth is Happening donation gifts, gifts.whatonearthishappening.com. In that, I just explained it as a spiritual allegory, a story, poem, or picture that can be interpreted to reveal a hidden, encoded, or covert meaning, typically a moral one. In this definition, it says a moral or a political one, but in general, spiritual allegories talk about moral spiritual lessons. And that's, in fact, what the Matrix Trilogy and Matrix 4 Resurrections films are. And as I said, they're also, many people would not even recognize this or believe it, but they're Christian allegories from an esoteric perspective, as we're going to see elements of that today, as we did last week. The three characters, the three main heroes or protagonists of the film are Morpheus, Trinity, and Neo, of course. And they represent the three aspects of human consciousness: thought, emotion, and action, and how they have to be developed to come to fruition within the individual through knowledge, which is the fruition of our thoughts, so that we arrive at a place of intelligence and holistic understanding; true care or true love, the fulfillment of our emotions, the sacred feminine aspect of our consciousness, and that has to be about love for truth, love for freedom, love and care in a wider sense. Not just, from the friendship or familial or romantic definitions of love and care. And then, of course, right action has to be developed through our willpower, through our willingness to sacrifice, things that we want in our own lives to do the true greater good for our species. And that is the sacred masculine aspect of our consciousness. Each film asks and answers a specific question. So you'll notice I modified the slides a bit from last week. I took last week's tech issue as being an opportunity to even improve what I had put out the previous week, last Sunday. So I modified the slides a little bit and added this section. The first movie of the Matrix trilogy, The Matrix, asks and answers the question, what is the Matrix? And it answers it by explaining to us that the Matrix is control, and specifically it is mind control, and its ultimate objectives is human slavery, and that is the current human condition. So that movie is there to get people to understand that the human condition is slavery, and the Matrix that they talk about is the matrix of control operating in our world through mind control and human slavery. The second film in the trilogy, Matrix Reloaded, asks and answers a different question. It asks and answers, why are we in the Matrix? Addressing causality, addressing the underlying causal factors for the human condition. And it answers the question that we do not understand how causality works, or how natural law works, or how objective morality works. We don't understand the cosmic spiritual laws operating in the universe, the law of karma, the true laws of karma, which is natural law, as we've talked about ad infinitum here on What on Earth is Happening, which is, of course, cumulative information. If you're watching today, you should not be watching if you do not have under your belt all of the prerequisite episodes starting from number 1 and proceeding all the way to number 238. So if you're a new viewer, you should go back to the podcast section of whatonearthishappening.com and bring up podcast number 1 and listen in order at your own pace. Don't skip around. Listen progressively in order all the way through. Otherwise, material covered in the later episodes will not make full sense to you, and you're not going to get the full tapestry of information. As I said, this is cumulative information. So the third film of the trilogy, Matrix Revolutions, asks and answers the question, how do we get out of the Matrix? Okay, it's not good enough just to describe your prison. You want to know, how do you end that human condition of slavery? And this film answers the question that we get out of it through willpower, through persistence, through personal sacrifice, which the main character, Neo, representing right action, has to undergo trials and ordeals and constantly execute his willpower, have persistence in fighting all of the evil that he fights against, and make ultimately a personal sacrifice of himself, the ultimate sacrifice. And that's what makes this a Christian allegory, of being willing to sacrifice himself for the true greater good of humanity, and so that others may have a chance to be free themselves. Now, this fourth film, Matrix Resurrections, asks and answers some different questions. And it doesn't really answer the question, it leaves it up to you to answer, okay, for yourself. But it asks very specific philosophical questions regarding memory and purpose. Okay, memory and purpose are motifs and themes that show up over and over and over again in this allegorical film. And the questions that it asks are, who are you and what is your purpose? And these are questions that can only be answered by the individual. The individual has to consider these questions when watching this film and understanding that these are indeed the philosophical questions that are being asked. It's about remembering who we are and remembering what we really truly came here to do and get back on mission. That is what the word resurrections in the title of the film means. It means we have to resurrect care and right action, okay? Represented by the Trinity and Neo characters being reinserted into their pods in the Matrix by the machine world, and having to be resurrected back to life, to the real world, and get back on mission to free minds from the mind control of the Matrix and indeed the slavery of the Matrix. So powerful philosophical questions asked, pretty much up front in this fourth allegorical film of this franchise. So where we left off last week was that Neo had been rescued from his pod, Trinity still imprisoned in hers and still in the Matrix, and Neo being brought on the Nemesine hovercraft to the human cloaked city of Io. And again, Io representing in computer terminology, in out. That is what in computer technological jargon Io means. It means connectivity, connection. And that is, in fact, what the movie is also about. It is about connecting, remembering, reconnecting, and reactivating your purpose. So connection is a huge motif throughout the film as well, and that is represented by the human city Io, representing connectivity to in or out of a computer system. And the main hero, Neo, was being brought to a landing pad, the hovercraft landing pad, where he was awaited by apparently who is known as the general and obviously her higher up crew. And the crew of the Nemesine was telling Neo this isn't going to be a warm welcome. They knew that they, whoever is awaiting them on that hover pad was not happy with their behavior of going on this rescue mission. So when they do arrive, they encounter Niobe from the original trilogy, who had originally given, against her own orders back then, given Neo her hover ship, the Logos, meaning, of course, the word, again, biblical and Christian allegory inserted throughout the entire series of films. But Niobe is very upset with the crew of the Nemesine for taking the hovercraft without permission and going off on this rescue mission by themselves. And so she grounds the entire crew and tells them, scrub down the ship, you're grounded. And, she's not happy that they brought Neo here because she's fearful. And, this is a theme that comes up over and over again for her. She wanted things to remain as they are, with this sort of stalemate, with the humans hiding, The machine's still trying to eradicate them. They did persecute their war against the human beings, as we'll see. It didn't end forever. And she's fearful of entering war again. She's war phobic. And doesn't matter if it's for the right reasons. She'll do anything to avert war. So as she speaks to Neo, here she's seen grounding the crew, disciplining them, basically telling them, they went out on this mission half-cocked, because she's very upset that Neo is there, because she knows that because he's there, the machines will be looking for him to try to come and take him by force, by whatever means necessary, whatever destruction happens to that city. And she doesn't want that, because they want to reinsert him back into the Matrix, obviously, to power, their whole civilization as the central power plant. He and Trinity's pods represented. That the new maker of this Matrix, the analyst, came up with this power system, as will be explained later. Again, all of these slides are slightly enhanced. I felt that was necessary to make them come across properly, with the detail and color intact. Modern filmmakers have this ridiculous notion that they need to make their films ultra dark, and if they included this type of contrast and enhancement to their cinematography, their films would be incredibly more well received, because people could actually see the detail of the beautiful detail that they have in these films. But unfortunately, they squash with washing it out as far as exposure goes, as for darkening it so badly. So all of my still frames here are going to be slightly enhanced, and I think they look far better than the originals. So in the conversation between Niobe and Neo in the city of Io, it goes like this. Niobe says, "It's so easy to forget how much noise the Matrix pumps into your head until you are unplugged." And this represents the mind control as a constant barrage, constant media barrage, constant activity in the mind. And finally, when you're unplugged from that, it represents more stillness in the mind, ability to organize your thoughts and not just have your thoughts race and, just be controlled by the propaganda put out by, the mainstream media and their narratives. And she says something else makes that same kind of noise. It takes over every damn thing, just like the Matrix. War. See, she is deathly afraid of war. She doesn't want anything than to go back to physical combat, because she was younger when that happened and she thought that it would never end. And so she has war phobia at this point and will do anything to avert war, even not fighting truly back with strength and persistence against the machine world. She wants this uncomfortable stalemate. But meanwhile, billions of souls are trapped in the Matrix, and she's not doing anything really to free them. She just wants the comfort of what they've built with Io. And this represents people in the world that don't want to really truly fight for freedom. They'd rather go off in some wilderness or paradisical type place and just stay hidden. And essentially that's what Niobe represents here in the city of Io. She says, "They said you saved us," meaning Neo. And she says, "I didn't believe it. I'm ashamed of it now. My pessimism of how long it took me to believe that a world without war was possible." Again, she thought it would be eternal, or as long as she lived. She says, "You gave me that. You gave that gift to us all. And it is the gift that continues to bear fruit." Meaning because, he was able to get the machines to stop their war temporarily through his Christ-like sacrifice, that Io was able to be built and these humans are able to live in the relative comfort that they do. She says Zion was stuck in the past, stuck in war, stuck in a matrix of its own. They believed that it had to be us or them. This city was built by us and them. And Neo says, "What happened to Zion?" And she says, "All of the troubles started in the machine cities." Okay, here she is beginning to take him through the hydroponics area where they grow food, and we'll see that they basically are working together with synthients. And before she answers the question about what happens with Zion, I'll just take through a couple of slides here. She's taking Neo through the food growing area where they modify genomes of certain foods to make them able to be grown again. And they're very proud of this operation, and they have sentient machines working with them in the real world to help to grow food and sustain their underground population. And, again, the enhancement on these shows a lot of the detail, which is incredible. It's a very powerfully striking visual film as well. I really like the visuals and the special effects, and I don't think that they were overdone. They were used appropriately. And, she's introduces him to Freya. And we'll get to that. We'll get to that conversation. Okay. So, mainly I wanted to explain that she's very tied to having them maintain what they've built, right? She doesn't want to lose that. So, she even shows Neo how they've been able to grow strawberries, which they're very proud of. And, she prompts him to take a bite of one, and, he eats it. But the whole point there in that sequence is that she doesn't want to lose what they have now. And that's what she's so fearful of, losing what they've built, even though essentially the machines still run the world and are enslaving the rest of humanity. As long as their little isolated pocket of human beings is okay, that's all she currently really cares about. So her wider care is deadened because she wants to remain hidden, she wants to remain safe, and she wants to remain comfortable. And that's where so many people are at in the freedom movement. That's all they ultimately care about, right? If it means losing that, then forget it. I'm not going to take any action that jeopardizes that. And I hate to say it to people, but guess what, folks? You need to hear the truth. That's not going to get this war done. That's not going to get our side to win this war in consciousness and in spirituality. We're not going to win it that way. We're going to win it through right action and courage and persistence and willpower and sacrifice. It's not going to be that easy. Like you build a nice community and then what? Agents of the system of slavery aren't going to come and destroy it through violence? Of course they are. So this is a dynamic that has to be confronted within the freedom community itself because they're way off on how they think. They think like Niobe for the most part. And that's not good enough and not going to get it done. Okay? Get as offended about it as you like. It's still true. So she then asks, Neo asks Niobe what happened to Zion. She says, all of the troubles started in the machine cities. Power plants were unable to produce enough energy. And the reason for that is because of what Neo did in the original Matrix. And people's minds were being freed. The last movie ended with the whole idea that if they wanted to be free, the machines would not stop them. Okay, and therefore their power levels are dropping because people were leaving the Matrix at that point. He was successful in at least helping enough people to free their minds where it was having energy impact upon the machine civilization. And then Niobe goes on to say, nothing breeds violence like scarcity. Hey, just like in our world, the same things happen, right? They're competing over energy. And they have this scarcity mentality that there's not enough to go around. And so they start conducting war. In this case, they started conducting war on each other. She says, for the first time, we saw machines at war with one another. We got word from the Oracle of a new power rising. And of course, that is the analyst. Okay, because the architect and the Oracle programs within the Matrix, programmed in the trilogy to keep the status quo going. Okay. Representing the current social engineers and, of course, the New Age movement and religion, the Oracle represented, to keep people's minds placated and keep them dreaming of a savior that is going to come, that they don't have to become the one. They don't have to activate their own right action and act in the world to help end the situation of slavery. Somebody else will just do it for them, abdicating that personal responsibility. So the machines clearly were not happy with the architect and the oracle. And as we'll see, they were eventually purged from that matrix. And the new incarnation of the matrix was given to the analyst to forge. And he came up with a new energy system to keep the machines fed. So she says, we got word from the oracle of a new power rising, and that was the last that we heard from her. After the siege of Zion, and the war eventually desisting after what Neo does, she says Morpheus was elected unanimously to the high chair of the council of the city of Zion. And here they're looking at a statue in Io of Morpheus, like a shrine to him. And she says, oh, how he loved that. But as rumors of this new power spread, he ignored them. So he thought that the truce was just going to go on and people would be able to leave the matrix if they woke up to the illusion and the mind control of it. But the machines didn't really intend to allow that once their energy was affected. They thought that they would continue to have the same energy levels when that didn't happen because of Neo's efforts and freeing minds from that system of control and the subsequent energy loss. They decided to put the Matrix in charge of the analyst, and he came up with Matrix 2.0, a different variation of it powered by, Neo and Trinity. And obviously they continued their war against human civilization, even at the city of Zion. So he said he was certain that you, meaning Neo, what you had done could not be undone. All of these people never stopped believing in miracles and believing in you, meaning they believed in him as the savior, and they weren't ready for the continued persecution of, the war toward humanity by the machines. They essentially had used Neo as this stand-down effort, and when the new matrix of control, the new system was booted up, people weren't ready for it. And that's how people get comfortable. They think they've won something, like they've won World War II. They get comfortable, and then, powers of, dark occultism breed and rise and come up in their own backyard and start all over again. The Matrix is reloaded and rebooted. So Neo says to her, Trinity is alive. If there's a chance, she says, why did they keep her alive? If there's a chance that I can free her, I have to try. And that's when, obviously, Niobe's fear comes in. And she basically then tells him she's not going to let him go forward with that plan. She calls in her troops, her soldiers, led by Shepard, depicted there just behind her in this frame. And she says, she asks Neo, when he says, if I can free her, I have to try. If there's a chance, I have to try. She says to him, even if it means endangering everyone in this city, the city of Io. And she says, I'm sorry, Neo. I won't let what happened to Zion happen to Io. So obviously Zion was destroyed by the machines. She's not going to let that happen to Io because she knows that if he tries to continue to go to war with the machines by going and trying to free Trinity from her pod, that's the end of their energy, and they're going to be coming for them. And obviously they're going to be rebooting, another version of the Matrix, clearly. So this is her fear factor. This is why she won't move forward. She's afraid of war. She's not a true warrior anymore. She's forgotten her mission. She's forgotten who she is. Okay? All she's worried about is hiding, staying safe, maintaining the status quo, and enjoying the comforts that they've built in Io. Okay? Just like plenty of people in the freedom movement do. All right? So Niobe then has Neo taken to a holding room. It's like a, holding area, apartment room, but it's actually a quarantine room, as we'll see. It's like a medical quarantine center high up in one of the city's, underground skyscrapers. And you see right there, it may be a little bit difficult to see. Let me just go full screen with it for a moment. There you see in this frame, it says quarantine, high risk of infection. Okay, so he's actually being quarantined from the rest of the population by being held here. And that is a reference clearly to the plandemic, the scamdemic of COVID-19. And, they're inserting that little jab. Lana Wachowski is inserting that jab there into it of people being kept walled off from each other and being quarantined and on lockdown. Okay, so very interesting thrown in there that he's not just being put in a holding cell, but actually in a quarantine. So moving on, Shepard, who is bringing him into his holding cell, says to him, people talk a lot. Sorry, I moved forward there accidentally. She says, people talk a lot about the old days, about you and the viral agent, meaning Smith, the siege of Zion. Everything was simpler back then. People wanted to be free, but it's different now. Sometimes it feels like people gave up, like the Matrix won. And that's a reference to the current situation that humanity finds itself in. People in the past, around like 2008, 2009, when like Ron Paul's running for president and people thinking they're making headway in human freedom, that they're going to end the Fed and everything's going to be okay, and they're concerned about freedom and they want to see it happen. More people were actually active in the freedom movement back then. Didn't have the right solutions. That's why we went down the path that we had, because they don't deeply understand natural law. They certainly don't understand the occult world that's ruling things. And, there was at least more of concern and more desire for freedom back then and in the past before then. And now you don't even have that. You have people that grow up not even wanting freedom, thinking that it's just okay that all of these lockdown measures take place. And he's saying to him, it's like the Matrix won, because they've won here. They've won in the mind. They've mind controlled people so badly and got them to believe in such nonsense during this pandemic through fear that they put them in, that it's as if people don't even want to be free anymore. And in fact, that is the case in our world. So, he is locked into this cell, into this holding quarantine area. And then Morpheus then appears on the balcony of Neo's room. And again, here's going to come another of the repeated motifs and, psychological, philosophical themes in the movie, the illusion of choice, where a choice that's so utterly ridiculous is put before you that there is no choice. You know what you have to do, and the opposite is not even a consideration. Just like there's other moments where a false choice, where neither thing is true, is put before people in this movie. That's the Hegelian dialectic. In this case, it's the idea that there was never even a question about what must be done. That to even suggest otherwise is to suggest folly and nonsense. So Morpheus says, when he's asked, where is the crew of the Nemesine by Neo, he says, they're standing by, waiting for you to make the choice to remain meekly incarcerated or bust the hell out of here and go and find Trinity. But that ain't a choice. Again, the idea of a false choice given. Does he stay there and do nothing? Or does he go with them and go on a rescue mission against orders to find Trinity? So then the Nemesine arrives on the scene. Again, Nemesine meaning the Greek goddess of memory, the word. And it also means similar memory, like-minded, okay? Meaning those who have remembered who they are, okay? The repeated theme of memory. And I did look up that Mark 3:19 verse that is on the plaque of the Nemesine, and it is about being betrayed, right? So, the whole concept that they will not be betrayed anymore. They're going to make sure that they're working with people who are real warriors. And we'll see this conflict come up between Bugs and Niobe a little bit later. So the Nemesine arrives to take Neo on the rescue mission of Trinity and get him out of that holding cell that he's put in by Niobe. In the next brief scene that happens, Niobe is talking to what is apparently or presumably her partner, Freya, and who is the chief botanist of Io. And she says, Freya says to Niobe, I know how much you hated locking Neo up, just like I know there's a part of you that is relieved now that he's gone. See, she didn't really want to do that because she has respect for him for the sacrifice that he made for humanity and even making Io possible. But she doesn't want the machines coming and delivering a war to the city of Io. So she's very uncomfortable that he even arrived, uncomfortable that she had to put him in that holding cell because she's so scared, right? Her fear of war, her phobia of war coming out. That anything but that, okay? Doesn't matter how evil these beings are. Doesn't matter how evil the situation of human slavery is. I'm not willing to go to war over it because I want my comfort and I'm attached to my life and what I have here. You know, that's where almost everybody's at. And she's the epitome and the representation allegorically of that mindset. So, and she says, I know there's part of you that's relieved now that he's gone. And that's because the machines won't go there to get him. They'll go to where he's at to get him. And Io is temporarily safe. Cowardice is what this scene is about. And Niobe admits it. She says, we worked so hard to keep Io safe. This scares me. She's admitting out in the open her cowardice. So she has to remember her courage. She has to remember her mission as a soldier in the war, okay, for truth and freedom. And she's forgotten it. So aboard the Nemesine, Neo and the crew of the Nemesine are looking at Matrix code on computer screens, searching through the code of the Matrix, trying to find where Trinity is at, her actual location within the Matrix. And Neo points to one of the screens and he says, that's her. But look at what he points at, a cross, okay? The code of the Matrix forms a Christian cross at that time. Again, a clear reference that this is indeed a Christian allegory retold in modern science fiction terminology. Again, the idea that Smith said in the first one, we're constantly telling the same stories over and over again, just with different names and faces. This is, in fact, the Christ story retold, okay, of the Savior who has to, have people follow in his footsteps, not by worshiping him, but by becoming, in their own consciousness, like him so that they can free humanity. And in that sense, he acts as the savior by setting that example. Berg, crew member Berg, then says to him, or says aloud when they find Trinity, it's sick how the semblance works. Remember, that was the thing that actually alters. Semblance was the machine code that alters your perception of yourself while you are in the Matrix and how other people see you, in fact. It's ego identification. And Lexi then chimes in as they're looking at the code of Trinity in the Matrix on the screen. She says, you see flashes of the real her, but the way she reads. And then Seek, the operator, says, code-wise, she's pure blue pill, meaning she's totally self-identified with the illusion, with the mind control, with all of the things that the Matrix is feeding her, all of the things the social engineers feed to us, how people become totally self-identified, putting them into smaller and smaller and smaller boxes for their consciousness, getting them to identify in multifaceted ways with smaller intersections of identity. And that's what Seek is saying here. She's a total blue pill. And then Bugs goes on to ask the question, this is a tough question, but it has to be asked. What if Trinity is happy where she is? And Neo doesn't quite answer that. He responds to Bugs by saying, how did I read when you saw my code in the Matrix? Meaning this second incarnation of the Matrix. And Seek answers exactly like her, exactly like Trinity. So it's showing that while people are self-identified, they have lost touch with their true identity as a human being. While they are buying into the mind control, they're blue-pilled. They accept the illusion, not only of what the Matrix is representing about the human condition, but they represent who the Matrix tells them who they are. You know, they're stuck in ego identification with the Matrix's version of them. So he says, you were no different, but we were able to eventually help get you out. You were able to awaken from that illusion. So it's saying, it's actually encouragement by saying your code didn't look any different. So if you did it and you came up out of the illusion, others can do it as well, no matter how badly identified they may seem. In the next scene, the crew is then brought to broadcast depth and inserted into the Matrix to go and start beginning the search for Trinity. So they're inserted near the area where she is at. I presume they put her near the area where she works in her motorcycle garage. And after being inserted to go on the rescue mission for Trinity, they almost immediately encounter the new Agent Smith. And Neo immediately asks Smith the question, how did you find us? And Smith answers Neo, you never appreciated our relationship, meaning the relationship between he and Neo. And that is because Smith is Neo's dark side. It's his shadow side. It's, the subconscious elements of himself. It's what the main hero, Neo, has to work on underneath. He's tied to him. That's why they're always like an opposite, but very similar in their dynamics, in the way they operate within the Matrix. He's explaining to him, we're connected. You can't really shed me or get rid of me forever. And that is, in fact, a allegorical correlation to our shadow self, our shadow side. And again, when Smith goes into him in the end of the third Matrix film, it's this black oil slick-like material. Again, representative of the shadow, the dark side of ourselves that we often don't want to deal with, but we have to integrate into ourselves in order to heal it. And Smith continues, you never appreciated our relationship. Not like the analyst. He used our bond and turned it into a chain. Okay? It's so obvious once you see it, right? So see, he is realizing that he's imprisoned, right? He doesn't want to be this agent within this system, okay? And this could represent certain people in the control system beginning to awaken that may not be fully good guys, obviously, but they're at least seeing how they're enslaved, okay? How they are put, their bond with the system has turned into a chain of bondage and slavery, that they're just as enslaved as everybody else. This is what Smith is saying here, okay? And he says it's so obvious once you see it, right? And Neo just then asks him, what do you want, Smith? And he says, I have such dreams, big dreams, mostly extremely violent revenge fantasies. But in order for me to pursue my dreams, I need to dissuade you from pursuing yours, meaning he doesn't want him going after Trinity. He needs the Matrix powered for his program to continue to exist. So he says, all you have to do is stay out of the Matrix and leave the doctor to me. Okay? So he wants Trinity to continue to power the Matrix. He doesn't want Neo going in there trying to rescue her. He says, just stay out of the Matrix and leave the analyst to me. And Neo says, you can have him. I'm here for Trinity. And he says, Smith then says, that's the trouble, Tom. He knew you would come, the analyst, just like I did. Trust me, you're not ready for him. This is a reference that Neo hasn't fully redeveloped his powers. He has awakened to his true identity, but he hasn't fully remembered who he is in the sense of what he is capable of doing in his actions in the Matrix. So he's not at full strength still. He says, I won't have this leash on my neck again, meaning, the leash that the analyst put on him as an agent. And what happens there is exiled programs arrive led by the Merovingian, who were exiles from the original Matrix trilogy. And the Merovingian, again, was the program that represented causality, the understanding of causality, who was definitely the best character, as far as I'm concerned, in the original Matrix trilogy, especially his role in Matrix Reloaded, the second movie, which was all about causality. Why are we in the Matrix? He represents the occultist who understands natural law, but also attempts to hide it from the others so that they don't become wise and don't learn why they're in the Matrix, and then subsequently, of course, how to get out, how to end that condition of slavery. He's a machine that he's a program that wants the Matrix going as much as anybody else, including the original architect and now the analyst. But he's mad at the analyst. He's mad at Neo because of what his original tinkering in the Matrix trilogy did to the program, and how it made them essentially purge programs like him. You see, he's not doing well. He looks like a poor guy. He looks like a bum on the street, that is has seen better days. And when they show up, they immediately start him and his cronies, the exile programs, representing old code that isn't used by the Matrix anymore because it has come up with something new. New narratives of mind control are constantly being generated. They're not necessarily anything brand new because, again, these occultists are like reptilian in their mindset. And so they don't really invent anything brand new. Okay, they recycle old narratives, but he's representing code right now that isn't really being used. It's disused, and that's why he appears in the condition that he does. But during the fight scene, as it unfolds between the crew members of the Nemesine and Neo and the exile programs led by the Merovingian, and of course Agent Smith, who is there fighting Neo, the Merovingian says to Neo, it is you. After all these years, I can't believe it. You stole my life, representing that now he's this disused program where once he was a heart of the old Matrix. Now the analyst doesn't really use his program, and he's, an exile. And the Merovingian Smith says their situation, meaning the exiles, is a little bit like mine. To have their lives back, yours has to end. So they don't want him tinkering around in the Matrix, trying to shut it down, trying to end it. They want the Matrix to continue, but they want to be prominent programs within it. So they represent, members of the hierarchy who want to be in control and to resume their prominent roles in the system of control, but not actually have it end. And, he doesn't want to be controlled. They don't want to have the leash on their neck by the new architect of the Matrix, the analyst. And the Merovingian then says, you ruined every suck my silly ass thing. He's ranting in French and cursing and, he's not even mentally stable as a program. He says, we had grace, meaning in the former incarnation of the Matrix, the former mind control system. We had style. We had conversation. Not this nonsense of everybody texting, and he mimics texting phone sounds. He says we had art, films, and books that were all better. Our art, our books, our films were all better. Originality mattered. They were, yes, creating the culture. They were the culture creators, and they were the ones who were the social engineers and set the policies within the Matrix for the people whose minds that they were holding in thrall. But at least they did it with artistic flair, is what he's saying. Now today, it's all social media and texting, and it's even lost its spirit. The actual mind control methodologies, he's saying, they've lost their dramatic flair and their cultured flair. Now they're just nonsense, and they're not even original. He says originality mattered back then, and you gave us face Zuckersuck, reference to Facebook and Zuckerberg, and cockney climatey wiki piss and shit. Wikipedia, all stuck in the whole paradigm of making people afraid through climate change. It's references to that. Okay. And he's saying he doesn't like that. He likes the old cultured form of the Matrix where, they had style, originality, culture, conversation, art, films, and books all better than what they are today. And that's a reference to how everything is in a state of decline, you know, because of, the current generation of social engineers not even caring to interject any of those things into their mind control system. It's just totally without any originality and without any thing that even makes it interesting, is what the Merovingian is saying here. It's dry and it's dead. And Smith jumps in and he says during his fight with Neo, when he has Neo beaten pretty badly and it looks like Neo's going to go down to Agent Smith, he says, "I've been thinking about us, Tom. Look how binary is the form, the nature of things." He says it's all ones and zeros, light and dark, choice and its absence, Anderson and Smith. So showing that, yes, indeed, our reality has polarity to it. This is one of the Hermetic principles, the principles that underlies natural law and how it works. Everything has poles of opposites, and ultimately they are one and the same. Light energy only exists, and its absence, darkness. Smith and Anderson could represent good and evil, or the true self and the shadow self, right? The things that are the identified illusory aspects of self, but which have to be confronted and integrated into the personality so that you can operate in the world in a state of balance and not in a state of trauma. And he's saying that this is who they are. They are these polarities, but ultimately are one and the same. And he says, "I feel bad about this, Tom." He is always calling him Tom or Mr. Anderson, never acknowledging his identity as Neo. He says, "I feel bad about this, Tom. After all, you are the only one who set me free again." So, and that means that he remembered who he was due to the whole situation where he programmed the modal, Morpheus started to wake him up, and that led to the scene where this current incarnation of Agent Smith woke up to his real identity as the viral agent who wants to be free of the control of the Matrix. And he says, "So you, more than anyone, understands why I can't go back." He can't go back into that illusion either, or into the exile, the control, the box that he was held in by the Matrix. They wanted him controlled, operating in that dynamic as the Deus Machina, CEO, okay, or boss, and he doesn't want to go back into that variant of himself. He wants to stay in the form of this viral agent that will eventually take power within the Matrix, and the machines don't want that. They want to keep him on a leash. That's what they do to their dogs. That's what they do to their intelligence agents. That's what they do to their military people and police. They keep them on a leash like the dog or the pet that they are. Saying that he doesn't want to go back on that leash, like he said before, is a reference to that, how the higher ups, the real people in power, the occultists and social engineers, keep these people as their pets, their dogs, which is what they call them. And as long as they're the good little order followers they are, they throw them a bone every now and then. So then Smith goes on to say, "You should have listened to me. Now you'll never see Trinity again." And then when he says that, that's when it triggers that sacred masculine anger in Neo. We saw that in the construct from the earlier part of the film when he gets angry at Morpheus and finally finds that sacred gift of anger and is able to find his power within the construct. Now he has to find it within the Matrix to defeat, at least temporarily, the Smith character, Agent Smith. And he finally finds that anger within himself again and uses it to defeat, at least temporarily, Agent Smith. Here you see him blowing back Smith through the wall with that power that he finally finds through his anger. and he defeats Smith in this combat scene. And then we see the Merovingian and leaving, but promising that the war between he and Neo is not over. And the next scene then cuts to Neo entering Trinity's motorcycle garage. So having temporarily defeated Smith and the exile programs, the heroes go to Trinity's garage to try to get her to agree to leave the Matrix, and they're going to formulate a plan to then obviously get her body. So when he arrives, Neo says to Trinity, "After we spoke, I realized that my life wasn't a life." At some point, I'm sorry, this is not Neo, this is actually Trinity's words. Let me correct this in my notes here. Trinity actually says, "After we spoke, I realized that my life wasn't a life." She's acknowledging she wasn't happy with her previous existence in the Matrix as a woman who was married with children. She says, "At some point, I think I gave up searching for something that was real." So here's this idea of not activating the will, not looking for genuine connection, not searching for the truth, not looking for something that is real, giving up, right? Not remembering who you are and what your mission is. That's where Trinity was trapped. And she's at least now acknowledging that within herself. She's looking at her failure, and she's not lying to herself anymore. She's saying, "I realized my life wasn't a life, and at some point I gave up searching for something that was real, searching for genuine connection." Okay? Which is a huge theme in the film, the genuine connection over the truth, connected via the truth and connected via your mission. And at that point, the analyst appears and dissolves Trinity's character within the Matrix. Her semblance in the Matrix is dissolved, and he replaces her. He doesn't actually become her. He just dissolves her, puts her back in a different position, and he's standing where she was standing. So he is clearly demonstrated to be someone who can completely control the Matrix as its new architect. He is clearly the one who created this new incarnation of the control system, of the mind control system and slavery system. And the analyst then says, we find that the analyst can control time within the Matrix. He appears, he replaces where Trinity was standing. And we find that he is able to control time. He can rewind time and create deja vu, who his cat is named, as a reference to the ability to go back and do it over again, okay? Resequence it, okay? Give people the same thing over again, okay? And he can see it in real time, okay? And everybody else is in slow motion. And this is the concept in films, cinematography-wise, where they call it bullet time, right? And bullet time is where somebody shoots a bullet and moves in slow motion, and you can, basically see everything operating in slow motion, and usually some camera perspective or some other character can move in regular time. It's a technique that they call bullet time in Hollywood. So the analyst comes into the scene, and he slows time down. He slows down time. So now everything is not only sort of frozen, but it's rewound. He rewinds time to the point where Neo enters the scene, okay? And he's going to tell him now what the new Matrix is, how it was formed, and generally, his plan for it, and make him an ultimatum that he better get his body reinserted back into his pod, powering the Matrix again as he was with Trinity. So here's how the conversation then goes down between the analyst and Neo. As Neo is trying to strike him repeatedly in slow motion, the analyst can simply move at will in regular time. And he says, "You can't beat time. This rewind is happening faster than you can blink. You gave me the idea," meaning from the original Matrix games, and based on what Neo did in the Matrix, the idea of bullet time. He says, you gave me this idea of putting in this idea of I can control time and rewind it and slow it down in this new version of the Matrix. He says, allow me to sum up our goal in a single word, bullet time. I know, kind of ironic, isn't it? Using the power that defined you to control you. Okay, because this was his claim to fame, the scene where he's moving backwards and, escaping the bullets of the agents as they come toward him, and now it's being used against him in this incarnation of the Matrix because the analyst can control time. And he says, I kept such a close eye on you, meaning in the new Matrix 2.0. And he says, and still you found a way out. Clever monkey using that modal. Okay. And, he means using the modal of the game within a game simulation to have Morpheus awaken to his true self and his true mission to eventually help find Neo and get him out, as we talked about in part 1. He says, I know this will be difficult for you to hear. After everything you went through, all that pain and suffering, only to learn that the world doesn't end when you do. See, and that means once you're out of the Matrix, right? That doesn't mean that other people are out. This is the idea. It doesn't matter how much you went through to get out. Others are still in there. Okay? And that reality doesn't end just because you got out of the mind control. It's still going on. Okay? And that's why the movie is called Resurrections. Trinity as care for the truth and care for all the other people who are enslaved has to be reawoken, and right action to continue to try to awaken souls within the Matrix who are still under the mind control of this whole system of illusion and slavery, that they must be awakened. This idea of leaving people, I'm going to just repeat this over and over again, folks, as the weeks go on. This whole idea that we should just leave people alone and not try to continue to wake them up is nonsense. If you believe that, you've bought the whole mind control system. You've bought into their goals for you. The social engineers want you believing that. The dark occultists want you believing that. That's exactly what they want you to think. It's not our job to wake other people up. If they're not awake now, we should just forget about them. I hear this over and over and over and over again in this bullshit version of the freedom community. And that's not the freedom community. That's the my freedom community. That's as long as I got out and I understand what's going on, fuck everybody else. Who gives a shit about them? That's not real ultra high-end consciousness. That's not the high-end version of love. That's, you love your little s self. You're only worried that you got out of some level of mind control, but you're still under it. You didn't really get out. You just think you did. If you think that, you just think you got out. You just believe you got out. And let me tell you something, folks. If you believe that our mission is not to awaken other people who are still under this mind control, it is you who are still in the mind control with them. You're still in the Matrix with them. That's all I have to say to you. Get as offended as you like. It's still true. It will be eternally true. It doesn't matter whether you believe it, accept it, know it or not. That's still the eternal truth. And that is what our mission is. And anybody that convinced you that it's not is a person spreading falsity and lies and is a false spiritual teacher. They're a false spiritual teacher, and they've bought into false ideology. They've bought into other false spiritual teaching, because that is, in fact, what we have to remember that our mission is to do here. And it matters for all individuals getting out of this mind control. It isn't a matter of some getting out. It's a matter of all getting out. And we have to remember that. And the people who are telling people, no, that's not what it's about. No, that's not what you should be doing. I'm not saying that there's not some better strategies by waking up people who are ready to be woken up, who are on the verge, who are on the fence. You start with them, obviously. That doesn't mean you don't worry about the people who were still under the trance, still in thrall. You still concern yourself with waking them up because they are affecting our reality, just as anybody else is. Their decisions in life affect what we experience. We are all connected as one. And people still don't understand this. They still will fight you tooth and nail that no, these people shouldn't be woken up, that they're not important. Nonsense. Nonsense. That's what our job is, and the problem is too few damn people are doing it. They don't have the resolve. They don't have the willpower. They don't have the persistence. And they certainly don't have the true care. It's not awoken in them, and that's why it needs to be resurrected from the tomb that it is in. And that's where it's at. He says, all that pain and suffering only to learn that the world doesn't end when you do. And he says, I was there when you died. And that's referencing when he went into the machine, back into the Matrix. The machines reinserted him when he came to one of their cities to go to war against Agent Smith. And there you see him in the crucifixion position with the cross on his chest with his arms outstretched. And Deus Machina taking his body and getting ready to basically reinsert it into the Matrix and resurrect him to physical life. Now his right action, it has to be resurrected out of his pod from the second version of the Matrix into right action and power in the world, which he's still not at full strength in. And Trinity, the heart, has to be resurrected to actually support that right action. Okay, she's going to be the ultimate driver of that right action as the sacred feminine, representing not only how powerful the true freedom movement would be if more women awaken, the actual female gender, okay, but if the sacred feminine of true care and heart-based intelligence is resurrected. And he says, I was there when you died, and I said to myself, here's the anomaly of anomalies. What an extraordinary opportunity. First, I had to convince the suits to let me rebuild the two of you, meaning he has bosses within the Matrix, and he had to get them to agree. This is the real occult power behind the scenes, right? The real top-level social engineers. He says he had to convince them to let him rebuild and resurrect the physical bodies of Neo and Trinity. And he says, resurrecting you both was crazy expensive, like renovating a whole house. It took twice as long and cost twice as much. And I thought you'd be happy to be alive again, and I was so wrong. He puts him through all of these procedures to basically rebuild his body. And it's total trauma and suffering, and they're not happy about being in the Matrix, obviously. It's trauma. Okay? He says, I was so wrong. I thought you'd be happy to be alive, and I was wrong. He says, do you know that hope and despair are nearly identical in code? So see, hoping and despairing, which we both really should not do, right? Hopium is the drug, and it's almost identical in code to despair, to giving up and not wanting to do anything, right? Running on hope is running on illusion, right? That's not what we need. We need to be realists, okay? It's not about hoping and wishing and dreaming for everything. It's about making it happen through an act of our will in the real world through our actions, okay? So hoping is another form of giving up and not doing enough. It's like saying it'll all just work out. And despair is the same thing. It's giving up. It's not taking real world action, not using your willpower to really change things through your behavior, through your actions. So he says, hope and despair are nearly identical in code. We worked for years trying to activate your source code. I was about to give up. And the source code is his code that's identified with the Matrix reality. So that's his Matrix source code, not his source code connected to true creation. The analyst is not referring to that here, okay? He is talking about his self-identification within the Matrix, that source code, okay? And he's saying he was going to give up on ever having him, come out of his real mindset of, I know who I am, I'm Neo. I know what I was here to do, to make a sacrifice and help free humanity. He wants to get him back to, I'm Thomas Anderson. I'm little me inside the big control system, the matrix, and I don't have any real power. That source code's what he's referring to. And he says, I was about to give up when I realized it was never just you. Meaning it was about him and Trinity. Alone, neither of you was of any particular value. But like acids and bases, you are dangerous when you're mixed together. Every simulation where you two bonded, let's just say bad things happened, meaning bad things for the matrix, bad things for the analyst, bad things for the machines. See, it was about their connection, right? He sees that there was power in the connection between emotion and action, right? The sacred feminine and the sacred masculine, what is referred to occultically as the chemical wedding, the alchemical wedding, actually, okay? Bringing together the chalice and the blade. Okay, the sacred masculine of action with the sacred feminine of emotion, of heart-based intelligence, supporting it, supporting the will. And he says, however, as long as I managed to keep you close, but not too close, I discovered something incredible. Again, keeping them from being able to touch each other, from connection, from genuine bonding, not allowing that alchemical wedding to happen. Right? He wanted to keep them close, but not too close, not actually making a connection. Here, we see them reaching out to each other, Neo and Trinity, during this original resurrection rebuild of their bodies by the machines and the analyst. And then when they finally did touch, this is when he was referencing that bad things happened for the Matrix, when they finally were able to make a connection. And again, this is the repeated motif of them touching hands, holding hands, coming together, bringing that bond of emotion and action together, of incredible power then to actually change things in the reality of the Matrix is able to happen. And he then goes on to say he discovered something incredible. If he kept them close but not too close, something amazing happened. And he says, my predecessor, the architect, loved precision. His matrix was all fussy facts and equations. He hated the human mind. So he never bothered to realize that you as human beings don't give a shit about facts, right? So this former matrix was built on simply trying to change people's perception of reality. And he realized that didn't work as well because, people were more easily able to discover that through some sort of a logical process of truth discovery and realize the inherent inconsistencies in the illusion that the Matrix is feeding them. As people with any logical ability now have the ability to see through what the media is telling us, what the government is telling us, and recognize that it is all preposterous lies that should be easy to see through for anybody with any cognitive capability. However, he's saying most people don't give a shit about facts. They don't work on their logic center. They don't have the ability to discern truth from falsehood. They don't have the ability to, use the truth discovery method of the trivium to discern reality from fantasy. And he says, it's all about fiction with human beings. The only world that matters to them is the one in here, pointing to Neo's forehead. And again, a reference to the third eye, a reference to the neocortex, who Neo ultimately represents, the higher center thought functions of the brain, but also that which creates imagination. And when the imagination is run away and not in a state of balance, it can engage in pure fantasy. That's the danger of an out-of-control imagination. And, he's pointing to that center of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, and saying this is what it's all about with most human beings. It's about fantasy to them. It's about fiction. And he says, and you wouldn't believe, he says, that's the only world that matters is the one in here, the one in their perceptions, right? But he's going to tell him how the best way of controlling those perceptions is. He says, and you people will believe the craziest shit. Why? What validates and makes your fictions, your fantasies real? Feelings, emotions. That's why he has to keep them together. Okay? To control the behavior, you have to control the emotions. Because if the emotions truly come online to true care, then they're going to generate right action in the world and true change will emerge. But if the emotions can be kept in that state of fantasy and they could keep feeding the mind that would normally act properly and in a state of balance, if the emotions can keep feeding that fantasy and falsehood and illusion, then the actions are going to be held in check and they're going to be in a position of stand down. They're not going to do anything that's going to ultimately harm the matrix. It'll just keep it going. So then he goes over to one of the other garage workers in Trinity's garage named Kush. And he says to Neo, Kush here is one of my handlers. And handlers are bots. They're programs that the analyst has coded into this version of the matrix that he can activate at any time. And essentially, he will put them in what he calls swarm mode if necessary, which is a whole lot of them operating all together as sort of like a zombie force. But he's showing how he could activate any of these bots or handlers anytime he wants to do any action that he wants within the matrix. This is his upgrade, like an agent to the system. And he says, they're everywhere, his handlers. He says it's such a pain cloning agents over a copper top, meaning this is more efficient to just code bots or handlers as human beings into the matrix code, because the other way of doing it, having to make, agents come in and possess the body of one of their normal battery human beings, is a pain in the ass. It costs a lot of energy. He says it's far more effective just to saturate the population with these bots. And he says, and bonus, swarm mode is sick fun. So he gets a total, thrill, a surge of personal satisfaction and thrill when he turns on these, agents within his version of the matrix, these bots or handlers, as he calls them. So then what happens is the agent takes a gun out of a drawer, this agent or bot named Kush, and he fires it in slow motion directly at Trinity's, or Tiffany, as she is in the Matrix, at her head. And then the analyst continues talking to Neo. He says, do you ever wonder why you have nightmares? Why your own brain tortures you? He says, that's actually us, meaning the social engineers of the system who constantly produce anxiety in the population. He says, that's us maximizing your output. Here, meaning the more anxiety and total, schism that they are in the mind over regret for the past and anxiety over the future, not truly being in the present moment, the more energy mentally, psychologically they make for the machine world. And that is what the real world social engineers are. They are like parasites feeding off of host energy mentally and emotionally. And that's what this represents, what he's saying. He says, here's the thing about feelings. They're so much easier to control than facts. And that's what the new version of our reality as far as mind control is doing. Controlling people through heart control, getting them afraid, and then fooling them into believing that they're somehow wonderful because they wear a mask and socially distance, all playing off their unevolved emotions through heart control. He's telling people out in the open, that's easier to control than to try to feed you some facts and get you to logically process things. It's just easier when you're just dumb, you don't know anything, and we can control you from an emotional level. It's far easier for us to manipulate you that way. He says, it turns out in my matrix, the worse we treat you, the more we manipulate you, the more energy you produce. And that is, in fact, how it works. These people are willing to do anything for the control system in the modern world. The social engineers, the media, the dark occultists tells them what their culture should be, how they should think, what they should believe, feeds their minds full of bullshit and illusion on the nightly news. And these people will do anything they want They will obey their every command because they have them on a leash. They have their minds firmly ensnared. And they could get them to carry out their bidding for them. And that's their source of energy. And that's their source of power. Their perception over others through the manipulation of their emotions. Heart control, as I call it. He says, the more we manipulate you, the more energy you produce. It's nuts. I've been setting productivity records here in the new version of the Matrix every year since I took over. Meaning his form of the Matrix is more efficient and produces even more energy than the old version. He says, and the best part, zero resistance. People stay in their pods happier than pigs in shit. Okay? So controlling things through emotions facilitates the energy coming into the machine world and them feeding off of people, keeping them in this state of manipulation through the manipulation of their emotions. It's far more efficient. Produces more energy, and people don't wake up to it as easily. They're happy to stay in that state of illusion that way. He says, you know what the key to all of it is? You and her. This is a key part in the movie when he says this to Neo. He says the key to all of this is you and Trinity, quietly yearning for what you don't have while dreading losing what you do. And this is the whole freedom movement. This is the My Freedom movement, ladies and gentlemen. What are they yearning for? He says you're yearning for what you don't have. What's the My Freedom movement yearning for that it doesn't have? Freedom. It says it wants freedom. But then when all the requirements are explained of what has to be done, you have to have willpower, persistence, incredibly deep level of knowledge of self, change your internal structure of your own psyche and mind through shadow work, and then have the willpower and persistence to help change others. And that requires personal sacrifice of other things you wanted to do in your life to do the true great work of working on yourself and then helping others work upon themselves and come out of the illusion. Then the My Freedom movement says, oh no, I'll have to give up my job. I'll have to give up my salary. I'll have to give up relationship with friends. I'll have to give up relationship with family. I'll have to give up relationships in possibly marriage or significant others. And I don't want to give up any of those things. I want it both ways. I want my cake and I want to eat it too. I want to do no sacrifice and have freedom. Well, guess what? It doesn't work that way, boy. It doesn't work that way, little girl. That's not how reality works. Get over it. You keep believing in the fantasy bullshit that religion and the New Age wants to feed you, that you could just wish your way to freedom. That it's just about thought and emotion without action and sacrifice. And that's total bullshit. And that's what he's saying here. He's saying, we keep you in a state where you're yearning for freedom constantly, but you're always afraid of what you will lose if you really put skin in the game. See? That's why so many people stay on the fence. They don't get started. They don't speak out. They don't put real skin in the game. They're not acting. They're passive spectators. And he's telling you this is how we keep you enslaved. This is how we keep you in the matrix. Because the key is you're quietly yearning for what you don't have, freedom, while dreading losing what you do. All of the identified attachments that you have in life. And you know what the ultimate attachment is that people dread of losing? Life itself. And that's why they're deathly afraid of war. Like Niobe. This is a direct reference to Niobe. She wants freedom, but she doesn't want to engage in the sacrifice required to make it happen, to bring it into fruition, which may require physical war, because she's ultimately a coward. And people want to leave that off the table, and they don't want to leave it on the table as a possibility. If everything else goes south and we can't free minds, that's going to have to be where it goes. And people have to accept it. And just learn to live with the fact that that's reality and that's just how it works. Or give up on the dream of freedom. Give up on the whole idea that we should not be enslaved. You know? But that's what people will say to you. They'll lie right to your face and say, oh yeah, I care all about freedom. And you say, do you know what the requirements are for actually making that come to fruition in the real world? And then you tell them what those requirements are. And they say, well, I'm not willing to do any of those things. And then my answer is, you don't give a shit about freedom. Don't lie to me. Don't lie to the whole community. And most of all, don't lie to yourself. The first step of initiation, learn it. Learn it well. Stop lying to yourself about what's required. And especially if you're willing to actually do it. Then don't tell me you're interested in freedom if you're not. And that's what he's coming out in the open. That's why the analyst stole the show. He stole the movie. Neil Patrick Harris, as the analyst, stole this movie. He's by far the most important character with the most important dialogue. Okay? And he's telling him right out in the open, this is how we keep the system of slavery in place. You guys aren't on the same page. You're in a state of internal contradiction between your thoughts and your emotions and your actions, especially your emotions and your actions. You say you want freedom, but then when it's explained what the requirements are, you don't want the personal responsibility and personal sacrifice that are required. You don't want to go there. You don't want to put that skin in the game. So he says to him then, for 99% of your race, that's the definition of reality. And he's absolutely correct. He's speaking the words of truth, again, coming through the mouth of the villain, a big Hollywood technique. He says, desire and fear, baby, just giving the people what they want, right? So sarcastically putting it right out there in the open to people. And many people still can't see it. He's telling them what their own mindset is as a deep psychologist, a deep occult psychologist and social engineer. And people who watch this film still can't understand they're talking about you. They're talking about you who haven't developed true intelligence, true care, and right action and willpower. Haven't done it. And courage to make the sacrifices that are going to be required to really change things in our world. Beautiful dialogue here. So then he holds up an apple. And again, this could be a reference to biblically to Eden as well. And Satan. Okay. And the force that is holding back the evolution of consciousness. He puts the apple in the path of the bullet. It explodes the apple. And as the bullet gets closer and closer to Trinity, this is Neo in that state of total fear and anxiety over not being able to do it because his powers aren't developed fully enough. He can't stop that bullet. He's in that state of desire to save her and fear that he's not going to be able to do it. Because he isn't ready for the analyst. See, he doesn't know himself in fullness. Okay, he hasn't integrated the shadow side enough. And he's lacking the powers that he even had in the previous version of the Matrix. Because he's not integrating that shadow emotional side. And Trinity hasn't woken up to her power as the one who will support right action as the sacred feminine, the emotional aspect of consciousness. That connection isn't there. And so his power is weak, and he's not able to stop the analyst. You know, this is what the Agent Smith character told him earlier in the fight scene. You're not ready for him. And it's true. At least not yet. So the bullet then approaches Trinity's head, and the analyst is saying to him, she's the only home you have, Thomas. Come home, meaning reinsert your body back into the Matrix and power our world for us. Come home before something terrible happens. Meaning he'll have to watch Trinity die all over again. And the analyst then finally stops the bullet by just simply, picking it up just before it penetrates Trinity's temple. And time then returns to normal as the analyst disappears from the scene after giving Neo that ultimatum that you better put your body back in the Matrix or bad things are going to happen to her. So he's, giving him that choice. Okay. Again, another dialectical choice. Either you go back in the Matrix or Trinity dies. Both are horrors. It's not a choice. Okay? And he'll revert to a failsafe of going back to the old version of the Matrix if he has to. So in that scene then, to conclude this scene, Neo actually calls Tiffany Trinity. He yells to her, Trinity. And immediately Trinity says, you shouldn't call me that. So she's definitely not awakened to her identity here, her real self. And she is still firmly in the illusion of the Matrix as, her role that she's playing there as a parent and wife. And Neo says, I'm sorry. I have to go now, but I'll be back. So he can't pull her out of the Matrix right now at this point, even her at a mental level, to get her to stop identifying with her false self. And the analyst has shown his power hand. He's shown that he's really holding most of the cards here. And Neo's really not ready to take him on. So in the next scene, a hovercraft shows up to where the Nemesine is broadcasting into the Matrix and tells them that they're going to escort them back to IO, that they don't want them out there doing this mission, and they're going to be escorted back to IO for going on this rescue mission of Trinity without permission from General Niobe. The pilot of the captain of the hovercraft is Shepard, and he says to the Bugs and her crew on the Nemesine, he says, the general ordered me to look after your ship. Squids are coming, machine sentinels. Squids are combing this area, I should say. And he says, you can stay here and die when the squids show up, or you can come back and face a court-martial in IO. And Morpheus then interjects and says, and you call that a choice. Again, another illusion of falsity of choice interjected. Stay here and die or come back and be court-martialed and imprisoned. It's not really a choice. They're both terrible dialectical outcomes. And then in the next scene, when they finally are escorted back to IO, this is where tensions really heat up between Niobe and Bugs. Bugs finally confronts Niobe directly when, the crew is brought before her. And she says to Niobe, Niobe first says to Bugs when they come off the ship, Shepard should have left you to the squids. And this really sets Bugs off. Bugs says to her, you care more about growing fruit than freeing minds. I wanted to leap out of my chair and cheer for this dialogue that Bugs hit her with, because Niobe is clearly the coward that doesn't really truly want to engage the mission to reawaken, resurrect Trinity, and begin reawakening the rest of humanity in this second version of the Matrix, this newer version of the Matrix. She's just content, cowardly-like, to sit in IO, cloaked from the machines, trying to allow this semi-truce to exist between the machine world and the human world, not take any real-world action, and simply live in as close to a state of comfort, of human comfort, as they can in the city of IO. This is all the people that just want to go and start farms out in the wilderness and live out in the middle of absolutely nowhere, not engaging the mind-controlled masses, not really speaking out in a big way and making people understand that we have to wake others up, that it isn't about just, staying silent and doing what you're doing and making your life as comfortable as possible. This is the illusion. This is the fantasy world that the new age and the system wants to feed you and put you in a state where Niobe is at. Don't be Niobe is one of the big lessons of the movie. Don't be Niobe. Niobe lost her mojo. She lost her gumption. She lost her real courage to act and accept, even if it has to come to war, then so be it. She's afraid to die. She's afraid to lose what she's built. She's attached to this reality. She's attached to life. Okay? And attached to creature comfort. Don't be Niobe. It's a trap. It's an illusion and a trap. So when Bugs finally basically tells her, screw you, you're worried about growing fruit more than you are freeing people's minds from the state of mind control that they are under. You know? This is what I hear when everybody goes, oh, the solution is this and hydroponics and this and that and organic and that. Like, look, you can understand all of those things and help yourself to be healthy through those things. That's wonderful. If you think that's the solution toward ending the human condition of slavery, you're delusional. Even free energy. People talk about Tesla and free energy. I'm not interested in any of that anymore until we end slavery here on Earth. Then we could have free energy. Then we could have true free medicine like Royal Rife was trying to procure and give to humanity, and free energy like Tesla was trying to procure and give to humanity. We're not going to have that in a state of slavery, because every time those innovations are made, agents of violence are going to show up and shut them down. You can't have other forms of freedom in a state of slavery. You're either enslaved or you're free. Freedom means you could pursue those potentialities and that creativity and those possibilities that come with it. Slavery means you are not free to do those things. And we're in a state of slavery until we stop putting the cart before the horse and trying to invent all this new stuff, new technology, new ways of doing things. The system's going to always shut that shit down on you. But because you're too cowardly to confront the system and realize, no, it's not about making anything new. It is about destroying the system. It is about destroying the mind control and the physical control system that exists here on Earth. Then something new can emerge from under the sun. But until then, nothing new shall emerge from under the sun. Get over it, accept it, understand it. And while you're at it, don't be the coward that Niobe represents here in the film. The runaway. I'm going to do a show called The Runaways. Everybody that wants to run away from where the real work is. I'll move out to the most remote place imaginable. I'll start my organic farmland. And meanwhile, in general, what they're saying, not everybody who thinks like that, but in general, what most people think like that is, as long as my situation is good, fuck people who live in cities. Fuck people who are still in the matrix. Fuck people who are still under mind control. I'm not going to try to help them and help them to come out of that condition. Well, guess what? It's your funeral. You're screwing yourself with that mental attitude. That's a satanic mental attitude. Okay? And that's what is represented here. It's an attitude of selfishness. It's an attitude of, as long as I'm okay, screw the other person who's still in the matrix. And that's what Niobe is content to let go on and on and on. And eventually she does overcome that throughout this film somewhat and come out of that mindset. But Bugs hits her hard and says, you care more about growing fruit than freeing minds. You gave up on people. You gave up on people. See, that's what it ultimately represents. And it could sound like I give up on people and say there's no way they're going to come out of it. There's no way they're going to come out of it with the effort we've made thus far. Because like I said in my fear of sacrifice presentation, which is the dynamic that's displayed here, I don't got this. Okay? The paltry few content creators in the world who really understand the dynamic taking place, we don't have this. Okay? We need infinitely more help. There needs to be tens of millions of people who understand and explain this. At least in the millions, if not tens of millions. When we have that many teachers doing the great work, then we're going to see some headway. We're going to see some real change happen for the better. But we're nowhere near those numbers because of the attitude embodied in the Niobe character. So, in this heated discussion, it's interrupted by a sentient named Kujaku. This bird-like creature, this hawk-like creature, machine that interrupts the discussion between, or the verbal fight between Niobe and Bugs, to hand to Niobe essentially what amounts to a request for a meeting by another sentient program in the Matrix, which we will find out is Sati, the young Indian girl from, or Hindu girl from the first Matrix trilogy films. So this sentient Kujaku is requesting this meeting on Sati's part from Niobe, and she is requesting that Neo, be brought into this virtual digital meeting. They're obviously going to either go into a construct or into the matrix to have this meeting. And that's where the next scene takes place. Sati is the one who calls for this meeting through this sentient Kujaku. And she tells Neo that she is the young girl that he met on the train station many years ago in the original Matrix. She says to Neo, my father was the chief engineer at the Anomalium, and explains to them that the Anomalium is that power center where Neo and Trinity were held. And it sounds like mausoleum. That's very deliberate in the allegory because it's a tomb from which emotion and action have to be resurrected from. Again, this is the Christ allegory. Instead of being in the tomb for 3 years, he's in it now a total of 3 days, as the Christ figure is biblically in the biblical allegory of the New Testament. Neo as the Christ figure, along with Trinity, as we're going to see, is a secondary Christ figure, because the one is each one of us. It's not just one individual. We all have to become the saviors of the human condition. And, the Anomalium is like mausoleum because they're actually entombed and they have to be resurrected to remember who they are and their mission. So very deliberate that they call it the Anomalium, combining anomaly and mausoleum. The tomb for the anomaly, the one, Neo. She says, my father designed the resurrection pods where Neo and Trinity were imprisoned. And Niobe then asks her, you knew that he and Trinity were alive and you didn't tell me? So Niobe is angry again that she wasn't told that Neo and Trinity were alive long ago when they were first reinserted into the Anomalium pods in the second version of the Matrix, that their bodies were built and put in those new pods in the Anomalium. And Sati responds, Io needed you. This city needed to be built for your people as well as mine, to heal that divide and at least heal it in some between the remaining humans and some of the machines who again assist the humans in Io because they don't want the control that the Matrix represents. She said, this city needed to be built for your people as well as mine. If I would have told you everything back then, you would have had a very difficult choice to make, meaning go after Neo and Trinity knowing that they're still alive on a rescue mission and endangering the city that was being built at that point. For the human beings to get to a point where they at least have the resources they need. And that represents we have to get to a certain place where we're okay enough to do this work. That means we're going to build ourselves up first before we then act in the external domain. Okay, that is important, that we have to do the internal healing work before we do the external work of helping to wake others up. And Sati then goes on to say, Neo's escape has destabilized the current matrix. The Anomalium draws its current from Trinity alone now. A failsafe has been triggered to reset the matrix back to the previous version, the one under the original architect. And then she says, but the analyst halted this reset. He wants this version of the matrix to stay where he's in power, because if he's held responsible for this version of the matrix losing power and then machines competing over resources and energy, he's going to be purged, and he doesn't want that to happen. So she says the analyst has convinced the authorities, the higher up machines than even himself, that you, meaning Neo, will soon return voluntarily because of the meeting that he had in the garage with Neo and Trinity, and him giving them that ultimatum that if you don't return and put yourself back in your pod in the Anomalium, that I'll kill Trinity. And Neo then, confirms this, and he says, because if I don't go back, he'll kill Trinity. Sati then says, faced with returning to your pod or enduring Trinity's death once again, what would you choose, Neo? And Neo says, I'll go back. And Sati says, the analyst knows you well, but that knowledge has made him incautious. Sorry, let me stay on that slide for a moment. She says, the analyst knows you well, but that knowledge has made him incautious. After you escaped your pod, he should have accepted his losses and devacuated Trinity, meaning take her out of that pod and just go back to the failsafe of the old Matrix. And she says, but that would have prevented this extraordinary opportunity that exists now, meaning Trinity won't be killed and we have a chance to rescue her. Okay? So in the very next scene, the crew members of the Nemesine all line up before Niobe, who is going to tell them about this plan that Sati has, and she's going to ask for volunteers for the rescue mission of Trinity. Finally finding a little bit of courage because she was presented with an option that has potential to work if pulled off. And every crew member, before she gets a chance to even tell them what the plan is, every crew member of the Nemesine steps forward and willfully volunteers for the Trinity rescue mission. And this represents that they're real warriors, that they don't fear death, that they will do what is required, that there is a subset of humanity that is the warrior class and that understands real freedom and will fight for it no matter what, no matter even if it means they have to sacrifice their own lives. And that's powerful. When they all step forward, I mean, that's like, these are the real lions, you know? They're the ones who aren't going to go easily. They're not going to go down easily in the quiet of night. They're going to fight. No matter whether they fight mentally, you know, or whether they have to fight physically if required. They're going to fight all the way through. You know, they're not going quietly. So, powerful scene where they all step forward without even having to be asked. And Niobe says, are you all out of your minds? See, she wouldn't do something like that because she's not as courageous. Deep, deep down inside, she doesn't have that courage activated inside of her. She's the equivalent of the cowardly lion in Wizard of Oz. You know, that's the character that needs more courage in this film. And she says, you don't even know what the mission is, right? Yet these people don't even care what the mission is. They're on it. You need somebody? We're on it. And Shepard says, who may be even an order follower in this version of this army of Io, he says to Niobe, General, we know you. And if you say that this mission is important, none of us is choosing to stay home. So at least he has the courage to say, I'm going to do what's required to go on this mission if it will help Trinity and Neo and all of humanity. So the crew is then reinserted back into the Matrix and they encounter the Sati program, and she is explaining to the crew of the Nemesine the rescue mission plan in this scene. And she explains what all of the procedure of the plan to go and get Trinity in the real world while disconnecting her mind in the Matrix reality is going to be. So, she goes on to begin to explain this, and here's how it's going to work. Morpheus will be brought, first of all, the anomalium is inside this huge structure in the middle here. It's a huge communications tower that broadcasts the energy of the Matrix out into other, pod fields and, powers the machine world. It's one of the distribution towers, you could call it, for their energy. And the anomalium where Trinity and Neo, where Neo was kept and Trinity still is being kept, is inside that huge tower structure. And Kujaku is going to bring Morpheus in his particle codex form into an area just adjacent to that tower. Okay? And he is going to, his program in this particle matrix is going to have to then proceed through the former umbilical tubes, the feeding tubes of Neo's pod. Okay? So here you see the Morpheus character pulling himself up after he proceeds through these umbilical tubes. Okay? What they call the amniotic tubes, like amniotic fluid of the birth canal. The feeding system for a human being in the womb, I should say. Neo goes through these tubes and comes up into, Morpheus goes through these tubes and comes up into Neo's former empty pod. And he then pulls himself up on that pod, and he is standing on top of Neo's empty pod, getting ready to make the leap over to Trinity's pod. And this is another repeated theme or motif, making this leap, representing making a leap of faith, a leap of the will, okay? Trusting that you can do it. You trust in yourself enough that you are making that leap of faith in action to continue, to persist, to keep engaging in your willpower, on point, on mission. And he makes that leap across to Trinity's pod. His particle codex program mode makes that leap onto Trinity's pod. And then he's going to begin the rescue operation, okay? He's going to stop the things that would ordinarily devacuate her and, basically cut her body up, blend it, shred it and reclaim it, as an energy source, which would happen if they put you down those devacuator tubes. And he's going to begin the process of getting her body out of there. So Sati continues and says, in order to unplug Trinity's body while her mind still remains connected to the Matrix, I'm going to need a second human brain to implement this bypass. Okay? And that's going to be Bugs. She says, since Neo has to be with the analyst, okay, in the Matrix, obviously trying to convince Trinity to come out of the Matrix mentally, the only available mind that is a near enough match is Bugs. And here we see Bugs will be brought by some of the Synthience machines to Trinity's pod, and her mind will have to help Trinity's mind bypass the Matrix. It's part of the technical discussion of the plan. The audience isn't supposed to really fully understand this, but it's supposed to represent that sacred feminine has to come online in everybody, and specifically in women, and that it also needs assistance. Okay, it needs to bypass the illusion of the Matrix. Okay, she is asked. The Sati program is then asked by Lexi, when she says the only available mind that is a near enough match is Bug's mind, and Lexi then asks her, you see Bugs here in this scene looking down at Trinity in her pod, realizing that connection in the sacred feminine dynamic and in the female dynamic. The whole thing that is referenced here is the power that women have of changing the world if they truly awaken and truly embody the sacred feminine dynamic of care, driving right action in the world, especially even influencing men. So Lexi asks, does Trinity still have to take the red pill? She asks this to Sati, and Sati says, since Kujaku and I are transferring her consciousness onto the ship, it is not strictly necessary. But what matters is that this is Trinity's choice. She has to be consciously making the willful decision to awaken out of the Matrix fantasy world, out of the world of illusion and mind control. And she says to the crew, extracting a confused or uncertain mind will in all probability kill her. And this is the idea that if people who aren't balanced and haven't at least done enough healing of their traumas come online to the real horror of the slavery system of our world, they don't always do well. They can become further imbalanced. So again, that's why I said it's best to start working on waking up people who are borderline, who have seen some of the control system and understand it's not a good thing, and you can wake them up fully, and then they could help awaken the people who have much harder difficulties. And, it's going to take more subtlety in bringing their consciousness back to reality. This is said here by the scene that if you pull unstable minds out of the Matrix, they could die. They see it as a total loss in identity, and they could do horribly unstable things in the world if they're brought out of it too suddenly. So that's pretty much the end of the explanation of that scene with Lexi there on the left asking Sati if Trinity has to take the red pill, and her explaining, no, she does not actually have to take the red pill. She just has to make that willful decision when she's presented with the choice to come out of the illusion willfully. And that's where that scene basically ends. Now, in the next scene, Lexi is in it again, and she enters Neo's quarters on the Nemesine before they are going to broadcast into the Matrix, and he's going to have to try to convince Trinity to mentally leave the Matrix. And she's going to try to give him some words of encouragement, but also express her doubts as well. She says to Neo, I thought you should know that I am here because of her, meaning Trinity. All I ever wanted was to be as fearless as Trinity. But I saw how she reacted in the garage, meaning she didn't even want to be called Trinity, right? She wasn't ready at all to come out of the mind control and the illusion. And she says to Neo, what if we're too late? What if she's not really Trinity anymore? Meaning her identity is totally claimed by the Matrix and she's not going to be able to remember who she truly is. And Neo says to her, I never believed that I was the one, but she did. She believed in me. So now it's my turn to believe in her. So, pretty powerful in the sense that the sacred masculine and sacred feminine have to work together, have to have that trust, have to have that connection, that bond, and have to trust that they are going to both remember who they are and come into their true nature and their true purpose on their mission to end human slavery. So Neo has faith in Trinity here. And that's what it's a good thing to have faith in individuals, right? To have faith in people that we know did the right thing and helped in this effort, right? That's not a bad form of faith that he's displaying here, okay? It's more personal trust of someone that he knows is going to be on point to do the right thing. More people have to develop that trust if somebody has proven their intentions and what their behavior, what their actions have already been. If they've been honorable and if they've been on mission and on point, that trust should be extended to them. And that's what Neo is displaying here in this scene. In the next scene, Kujaku lifts Trinity from her pod, and you see him in the background there behind Trinity, still in her pod with all of her connections, her feeding tubes and connection tubes to the Matrix reality. But I don't know if you can see here. I'll move my mouse over on the laptop. This point right here that I'm pointing to, this red dot, is a holographic projector, and you see the rays of the holographic projector projecting the image of Sati. When I watched it, I missed those and didn't really understand how a program could exist in the real world. Morpheus is there on the left as his particle codex that the human beings coded to help him exist in the real world as that particle codex, but Sati is not one of them. Kajaku, that sentient robot creature, is projecting her image holographically into the anomalium. So that should be understood there, what you're seeing there. And he's holding her body while she's going to start performing the operation to begin the disconnect of her body and at least prepare it for what she's calling her consciousness bypass. She's going to bypass her mind out of the Matrix by helping bypass it with bugs, where bugs will exist simultaneously in the real world and in the Matrix temporarily while they fully get Trinity's mind out and her body disconnected. Okay? So that's the plan. And Sati begins the process of doing that while Neo re-enters the Matrix, obviously on board the Nemesine, to attempt to rescue Trinity from a mental perspective, to convince her to leave the illusion of the Matrix, the mind control, and free her mind. So Neo confronts the analyst outside of the Simulate coffee shop in this, huge build-up between the main hero and the main villain. The analyst is completely surrounded by armed agents. who don't intend to really allow Neo to leave and want him reinserted back, bodily reinserted back into the Matrix. And Neo says to the analyst, all I want is to talk to her. And the analyst says, come back into the Matrix and you can talk to her as often as you like. Okay? And Neo says, if she tells me that this is what she wants, then you win. I'll have them insert my body back into the Matrix. He's saying, just let me speak to her this one last time. And if she stays identified with your world and your illusion that you project as the social engineer, as the occultist, as the dark psychologist, then I give up, you win, and they can reinsert my body and we'll power the Matrix. But he said, if she wants me, meaning she wants the truth, she wants to disconnect from the illusion, then you let us go free. And the analyst says, why would I do something as stupid as that? And Neo responds, right now, I'm on a ship full of people who will unplug me and kill him physically in the real world before they'll let you take me back and reinsert me into the Matrix again. So he said, if you want this Matrix, meaning the Matrix powered by him and her, and he holds them apart, and they create that power source for the machines in the anomalium through their closeness, but not able to make the connection, and that desire and fear continuing, and providing that energy source. He says, this is your only chance for that Matrix, meaning if it doesn't work out, we'll go back into the Matrix and power it. That's your only chance, because they're going to kill me anyway if I don't succeed in freeing her mind. Right? And then you're not going to have this Matrix because the higher ups are going to purge you. Okay? And this is representative of if the media doesn't succeed, they get wiped out. This is like, he's like the media, constantly feeding people bullshit, and the higher ups will wipe him out if necessary. And that's what it's representative of. Dark social engineers and dark psychologists operating through the media, controlling people through their emotions. And they'll get thrown under the bus if they don't do their job properly, and, they'll purge them. So he doesn't want to be purged. So he wants this form of the Matrix to continue. So he says, okay, I like tests. We'll let Tiffany decide. So as Sati finishes the bypass for Trinity's consciousness in the real world, in the anomalium, Trinity finally enters the scene and arrives at the outside of the Simulate, or I should say inside the Simulate coffee shop. This is taking place in the coffee shop where Neo and Trinity first meet in the second version of the Matrix, in the analyst version of the Matrix. Upon sitting down, Tiffany has her talk with Neo, and she says, after you left, I went home and I played the Matrix game, the game that he programmed as Thomas Anderson in this version of the Matrix. She says, I kept thinking, why does this story feel like a memory to me? And again, there's that idea of memory, of remembering who you are. The story felt like a memory because it really was her memories. It really was what happened. She says then, there's a part of me that feels like I've been waiting my whole life for you, for Neo. I wish I was who you think I am, meaning she wishes that she was that Trinity character. And that was her true identity. But she says, but look at me. I can't be her. So she still is not convinced. She hasn't remembered who she is. Okay? She's still stuck in the illusion of being the wife and the mother and, just having that family and, being someone in the ego-identified roles that the Matrix has given her. And Tiffany's family then arrives. See, even, again, the Matrix throws these curveballs, even if there's potential progress, right? Even if there's a possibility for awakening. They don't even leave it to chance. They bring in a failsafe. So her family enters the scene as she's saying this to Neo. And they're telling her this story that her daughter was hit by a car, and they're begging her to go to the hospital with them to see her daughter whose, arm was broken and is being casted by the doctors at the hospital. And she's looking at Neo, totally fearfully and you know, in a disappointed way with almost like tears welling up in her eyes. And she says it's too late, meaning it's too late for her. She's trapped in this fantasy world. Even though she has an inkling of who she really is under the surface, she doesn't think she has the willpower to break free mentally. And Neo says, I understand. He doesn't try to force the issue at that point. He wants her to make this decision of her own free will. And Bugs, realizing in the real world what is happening because of what starts happening with Trinity's body in the anomalium, she asks Sati, what's happening? What's wrong? And Sati says, and here we see, Trinity slipping back into the mental matrix in the anomalium, while her physical body is still there, not yet fully disconnected. Bugs asks Sati what's happening, and she says Neo was wrong. So they're realizing that the mission may ultimately be a failure because Neo had faith in Trinity and thought she was going to awaken to her true identity and leave the world of fantasy and mind control, but she may not be powerful enough to do that. And then inside on the crew of the Nemesine, on the deck of the Nemesine, I should say, the operator Seek is preparing to pull Neo's connection to the Matrix and kill him physically in the real world, because he's not going to allow if the plan doesn't work, they're not going to allow the machines to reclaim Neo and put his body back. He's going to go regardless. Okay. So, he's getting ready to pull the plug on Neo, but he doesn't do it yet. He's waiting for the decision ultimately to be made. And meanwhile, inside the Matrix in Simulate, Tiffany's husband, Chad, starts pulling her arm to try to pull her out of the coffee shop and get her to go with her family. And he says to her, Tiffany, you have to come with us. And then he repeats her name and screams it, Tiffany. And when he says that to her while he's pulling her arm, trying to pull her back into the Matrix, similar to how the analyst was telling Thomas Anderson, Neo, that he was engaged in a fantasy and the Matrix was the real world and trying to pull him back through the mirror. This is her being pulled by an agent of the Matrix, Chad, her husband, who, as we'll see, is one of the bots of, or the handlers of the analyst, representing that a lot of people in the world are handlers for others. They're there to get them to stay in the matrix of control. They're get them to stay under mind control because they have a connection with them in the fantasy. There's no genuine connection. And here, Chad and Tiffany are representing that non-genuine connection, that illusory connection that even family can be. Okay? Because, look, there's no touch between them. Her jacket, her motorcycle jacket, is between his hand and her arm. So there's no actual touch of skin. So this is representative symbolically and allegorically as a false connection, as a non-genuine connection. Because, as I said, genuine connection between human beings can only happen when they are both connected to the truth. Well, Trinity may be attempting to make a reconnection to the truth, but Chad clearly does not have a connection to the truth. Okay, so that's what that represents. And when he says Tiffany, when he calls her Tiffany really loud and screams her name, that she has to come with him, that's what finally starts to awaken Trinity. And the Tiffany character, in her last words, as Tiffany, says to Chad, I wish you would fucking stop calling me that. I hate that name. My name is Trinity, and you better take your hands off me. So she's finally awakening to her true nature, her true identity. This is the idea of memory. She's remembering who she is and what her purpose is in this scene. Okay? And then Chad, his eyes go into the Matrix code. He turns into one of the bots or the handlers of the analyst, and he starts attacking Trinity, while other agents in Simulate start attacking Neo. Neo is displaying some of his remembered powers, though, and he throws the agents into the air in this huge burst of energy, as he can do in the Matrix. And immediately upon doing that, because now they're both making progress, so what happens? The analyst steps in and stops time. And time is moving in bullet time again, ultra slow motion. And in this bullet time, then the analyst finally says, you know, there's no way I can let you go free. He's saying, it was never really a choice for me. I'm going to try to stop you or kill you both, but I'm not letting you go free, because then you'll come back into whatever version of the Matrix that we make, and you'll try to free more minds. So we can't have that, right? Not especially with you two together, remembering who you are and your real power and your real mission. Not going to happen. I'm going to kill you if I have to right here. And he says that cannot happen. So I guess it's deja vu all over again. And he points his gun at Trinity's head, and he says, she dies and it's all your fault, meaning it's all Neo's fault, while he points the gun at Trinity's head. And then a shock happens here. Smith shows up. Agent Smith shows up, of all people, to help Neo and Trinity, because he doesn't really want to be purged in this version of the Matrix, and he doesn't want to go back to being under the Matrix, under the analyst's thumb and his leash, as he called it, of running Deus Machina and not being his true identity as Agent Smith. So Smith shows up and he knocks the gun out of the analyst's hand as he's pointing it at Trinity's head. And he says to the analyst, Tom and I have way more in common than you know. Once he got out, let's just say I was free to be me, right? So he's saying that he removed him from the analyst's control when Neo was removed from the Matrix. And in that scene where he comes into full knowledge of who he is, full remembering and memory of who he is, he's now the old Agent Smith again, as the viral agent, okay? So obviously the analyst doesn't want that. But Smith does. So agents then continue to attack Neo and Trinity, while Smith attacks the analyst, and Kujaku in the real world, in the Anomalium, disconnects Trinity's body from her pod, and then Sati plugs in Bugs as Trinity's consciousness bypass, as she has called it. So that's going to allow Trinity to start to awaken fully to her real identity in the Matrix. And Bugs is going to go back and forth like she's Trinity in the Matrix, and Trinity is going to begin her process of consciousness extraction, which they normally would have had to do with the red pill. This bypass, in this bypass, you could say Bugs is almost acting as that red pill. So you see, when this bypass is initiated, that Trinity expands, and she's doing something similar to what Neo did when he was originally finding his power within the Matrix. And she's truly coming online to her power now, and she's going to start to gain powers like Neo has in the Matrix as the One. And the analyst does not want that. He wants anything but that to happen. And so he is freaking out, and he says to his all of his programs that we can't let this happen. We can't let Trinity fully wake up, because if the feminine truly wakes up, if Care truly wakes up, it's game over for us, because that's what drives right action in the world. And then the Matrix is done. So, and this is a reference, if women come into their power and influence men to do the right thing, the Matrix is done. Simultaneously, it's both of those things. It's not only women in the world, but it is also the true sacred feminine in any individual. Okay? So he orders the machines to kill her at any cost, and agents are going after her, and in the real world, squids or sentinels are going to her pod, but they discover that they're too late and that her body has already been removed, and taken on board the Nemesine by the Sati, Kajaku, Morpheus, Bugs, etc. They got her out of her pod in the Anomalium. So the squids arrive at the empty pod. And this is the empty tomb, the idea of the empty tomb after resurrection. The body's not there. This is also biblical allegory of the New Testament, because Trinity also represents now a Christed figure that is resurrected from the dead, resurrected from being dead spiritually and coming into new life in the world, so that she can affect life for the better in the world as a higher form of consciousness. Brilliant allegory, as always. I mean, the makers really know their stuff. So, moving on, Trinity and Neo are now being held back by all of the agents in Simulate from connecting. They don't want them to touch, because that's when very bad things happen for the Matrix and its agents. When the sacred feminine of emotion, of heart, of true care comes together in the alchemical wedding of connection with right action, willpower, courage, sacrifice, etc. And they finally touch in the Matrix, both knowing who they are, remembering who they are, and making that sacred connection of the alchemical wedding. And they explode. Explosive power emerges from their hands, and all of the agents of the Matrix are blown back and basically deactivated. These bots that he's using in the Matrix, this wipes them out. And again, I don't believe in this version of the Matrix the bots represent actual people in the pods. This is the programs of the main engineer of the Matrix, who is the analyst. So they are deactivated with this huge explosion of power between Neo and Trinity, the sacred masculine and sacred feminine action and emotion. The analyst, realizing that, here's that power of light emerging from them when they finally make their connection in sacred union from another angle, and destroying all of the agents in Simulate. The analyst then, promises them this isn't over, and he's going to initiate lockdown mode. So here's where they've finally come into their true power, right? They're finally realizing who they really are and remembering what they are there to do while in the Matrix, while in the Simulate scene inside the second Matrix. And the analyst comes forward and he says, this isn't over, right? I'm going to initiate now lockdown, right? Now, this is a reference clearly to the scamdemic again, right? Lockdown mode. He's going to have everybody trying to lock them down and isolate them and help not allow them to get out of the Matrix. So he's like, if you two are going to be, fully awoken in here, I'm going to end your lives here. You're not getting out to the real world, because then you could come back into the Matrix and try to reshape it however you want. And I'm not going to allow that. You go back to the real world, truly train, truly regain all your powers, and really remember who you are and what your real power is. That's the end of it for me, pretty much. Okay. And he knows he'll be purged by the higher ups. So he tells Neo and Trinity that this isn't over. And upon him saying that, once again, Agent Smith emerges to help Neo and Trinity. And Smith says he shoots the program of the analyst and blows holes in his program, and eventually he can't stay in the scene. So this represents two programs warring with each other, and Smith temporarily purging out of this scene the code of the analyst. And then he turns to Trinity and Neo and he says, this is where our little unexpected alliance ends. So he says, don't expect any more help from me. I did this because we have a common enemy in the analyst, and I don't want to be on his leash. So he's basically saying, I put him out of here for you for now, so you guys can try to get out of here, but that's it. That's where our alliance ends. And then swarm mode begins. The analyst has now activated all of the bots that he has operating within the Matrix. This represents all the people who are under perfect mind control and perfect possession by the social engineers of our world, by the dark occultists of our world, and by the media. okay, who understand everything about human psychology while these idiots know nothing about themselves. And they could be taken over and used as agents of the Matrix at any given time. That's what the swarm zombies represent. Neo then attempts to fly and cannot. His powers are not fully developed yet, like they were in the previous Matrix. So this is a clear allegorical representation that he isn't fully worked on enough to be able to truly change things there. He doesn't have his full mojo back, okay? And so they are operating in somewhat of a weakened state. So he can't fly them out of there to get an exit provided by the operator because they're still too weak from a perspective of how they can actually change things in this reality, in this false reality, and change things in free minds, etc. They're not that powerful yet. So they attempt to flee on Trinity's motorcycle as the swarm closes in upon them and people are attacking them from every angle. While this is happening, Trinity's body in the physical world is being brought on board the Nemesine. And, they're attempting in the Matrix world to escape it and get an exit. But while that is all happening, the analyst puts into the Matrix, he activates in the Matrix something new that we haven't yet seen before, and that is suicide programming. And let me tell you something, folks, this is real. In the real world, this is true, that there is such a thing as monarch suicide programming, where if certain agents certain people who are in the occult world, in that system of control, helping it, operating within it, like familial bloodline members, etc., high-level members of the occult organizations, sometimes they are not assassinated by other occultists or social engineers or, intelligence agents themselves. They are actually given mind control programming that they could activate with certain words or phrases or perhaps drugs and or sounds or things like that, sequences of sounds, and they go into self-killing mode where they're constantly dwelling on the thought that I have to commit suicide, and this is how they get them to kill themselves. And this is what the analyst turns on, representing that very real programming in our world. He turns on the suicide programming, and bots, or who he called previously handlers, and bots start jumping out of windows and acting as bombs, trying to bomb the motorcycle that Trinity and Neo are escaping on in the street below. So it's a pretty disturbing set of scenes because people are leaping out the windows from these skyscrapers, office buildings, hotels, and just killing themselves in the street. But apparently they do not represent actual people in the pods of the Matrix. They represent code that the analyst has put in this version of the Matrix to act as his handlers / bots. So you hear some of the heroes on the Nemesine say they're turning his bots into bombs. Okay? They're not actual people connected to the Matrix, apparently. So as those human bombs are raining down upon them, Neo and Trinity finally get away from that danger and are pursued into an office building by agents. Neo is holding them off through his ability to affect the Matrix by producing shields that can stop bullets. He does this repeatedly in these sequences where helicopters show up on the top of the building that they go up to. They go into an office building pursued by agents. They go up to the top of the roof where they're being cornered. Agents are coming up to the roof, and 2 helicopters show up and fire at them. Neo is able to stop the bullets that come from the one helicopter, and the other helicopter fires a missile at Trinity and Neo. And Neo is able to manipulate the Matrix to the extent that he can actually make the missile that is fired at them curve and strike the other helicopter, exploding it and taking it out. So now they only are contending with one helicopter. So they're showing that they have some powers, but they're not at their full strength. Again, they need to reawaken more to who they are and develop more ability to affect things in the matrix reality to free minds. Similar to how people in this movement have to do more, make more sacrifice, develop your ability to free others' minds. It's not enough people doing it, and they're not doing it with enough effectiveness. And that's what that represents, that they have a long way to go. So there's one helicopter still left, and Trinity and Neo are on the roof. Agents are closing in on their position, and Trinity says to Neo, I remember this. I remember us. She's remembering. There's the whole thing of memory again. She's remembering more of who she is, who they were together, and she says, we can't go back. We can't allow us to put them back in the Matrix. And Neo says, we won't. And they prepare to make that leap of faith off the building, that they're going to come into their true power to affect things in the Matrix reality by flying off that building, leaping off and then finding an exit. And one of the Nemesine crew members says on board the Nemesine, can they make the jump? Do they have enough remembrance of who they are and enough faith in themselves to make that leap of faith into their own power? And he's obviously doubtful. So Trinity and Neo both leap off the roof of the building as the helicopter and the agents attempt to pursue and kill them. And we see them beginning to sink lower in slow motion as if they're not going to make the jump. But then finally, Trinity is able to support Neo. And I know a lot of people will say, oh, they're trying to make this into some feminist movie where the women are stronger than the men. And, she can do it and Neo can't. She remembers who she is faster than him and has powers faster than him. And I don't see it as presenting that agenda. Okay, in something like the final installments of the Star Wars, franchise, there was that agenda clearly with Princess Leia, etc. I did see a, feminist agenda at work there. That the man who wants to actually fight the Empire is, selfish and too quick to go into battle, etc. And I don't see this being the agenda here at all in this film, okay? So I know a lot of people who are trying to break down the film and do analyses of it are saying this, and I think they're dead wrong. This represents, once again, the sacred feminine of emotion and true care for the truth and for justice in our world. True love has to support our actions when we are getting started in doing things in the world to try to make it better. Okay, so this is the idea. This is the dictum in Thelema. Again, this is Thelemic philosophy coming forward in this film. Do what thou wilt is the whole of the law. Yes, meaning do the higher will. And that is what your purpose is in this world, right? That's the whole of the natural law of our reality. It doesn't mean do whatever you want, because then it is followed by love is the law. True love, higher love, true care is the true law of the world. Love under will. That means love has to be the substrate, the stratum, the foundation, the building blocks of what we put our will on top of. It has to be what supports our right action. True care has to support our right action. And in this case, this is a different symbolic representation of true care supporting the right action, or the sacred feminine supporting the sacred masculine from falling, from failing and falling. Perfect allegory. The writers, the makers of the film, understand what they are doing. This is very deliberate allegorically, very deliberate philosophically, and it's perfectly done, because what has to be resurrected first is care. Even though Neo comes out, if action is doing what it does without the support of true care, of freedom for all, care for truth, care for freedom for all, action will always fail in its endeavors. It has to be supported by the sacred feminine dynamic first. Beautifully done. Perfect allegorical philosophy explained, occult philosophy. So she's able to fly. She supports Neo during the jump, and they escape. They're gotten out by the operator and extracted from the Matrix. They then finally wake on board the Nemesine hover ship and are actually able to connect and touch each other for the first time. And they then kiss. It's showing this genuine connection finally established. Them holding hands. Okay, nothing in between their hands, actually touching each other. Again, representing the importance of human contact during the whole COVID era. And that's what the machine's world, the real controllers, are trying to stop. They don't want us connected. They want us divided. They want us separated physically, actually. Okay, so this is representing finally they are fully abandoning the illusion of the Matrix, and they're stepping into their genuine connection. In the real world, they are now connected via truth, and they're going to truly develop their real power now together. So, again, this is a motif that is shown over and over and over again throughout the course of this fourth film, because that is it's actually really the third thing that you can't phrase it as a question, but it's saying that the film not only is about who are you, and what is your purpose, but it's about you must make a genuine connection with others in this world to fulfill your purpose, to remember who you are and to fulfill your purpose. So connection is just as much of a theme as memory and purpose in this fourth installment. So in the final scene of the film, we're coming down to the end here. The two heroes proceed to the analyst's home, Neo and Trinity, and they explode the wall of the home. This is showing they now can fly, and they have tremendous powers now where, they just blow the wall out and come in through the wall. Okay. And, Trinity, lands in his living room, and the analyst says to her, "How dramatic." And she says to him, "Tiffany," saying like, "You called me Tiffany in your version of the Matrix." She's horrified by that, obviously hated the name. And he says, "It was a private joke, an amusement, that's all." And Tiffany then kicks him so hard in the face that she literally kicks his jaw off. Now, he's a program. It's code, obviously, in the Matrix. But she literally breaks his jaw off of his face with a single kick, showing that she's very powerful and, can do things that she formerly could not. Meaning they've done their training, they've done their healing, they've healed from their trauma, they've done their homework, and now they understand how they can affect things in this illusionary world of the Matrix, and they can go about freeing minds now. And that's the last thing the makers of the Matrix want, because that represents no mental energy for them. And they're losing the belief by the masses, which continues their false version of reality. Okay? Just like that's what has to happen in our world. We have to help disconnect people from the fantasy and illusion that is represented by the version of reality that the social engineers give us every day, force-feeding it at us through the media, through religion, through the New Age movement, etc., through even medical establishments. All the institutions of our world constantly feeding us illusions through the dark occult priest class and social engineers. So Trinity kicks him across the jaw, and he now has his complete lower half of his face hanging off. It's a pretty violent scene, the few things that happen in this scene, but it represents that Trinity is now so powerful as another version of the One who can remake the Matrix at her whim, that she could even do things to the programs in the Matrix at her whim, right? That's how powerful she has become, because the One is not just one person. It represents Christed consciousness, higher consciousness that is able to influence and act as a something that inspires other people, an inspiration toward others, and helps awaken them to their true self and their true purpose. That is who Trinity, as well as Neo, now represent. So it isn't a matter that, Trinity is stronger than Neo and she's now the one. No, they are both now versions of the one, of Christed consciousness. Okay? They're both Christ figures. Okay? And because they have united in the alchemical wedding of the sacred feminine and sacred masculine. And that's where they found their true power. When true care and right action come together, that's the sacred wedding. That's the sacred union, the alchemical wedding. And that's what Trinity is displaying. Her powers to remake the Matrix as she wants to now, because of how much she is able to not only influence others and be an inspiration for others as another one, but she can actually even damage code of programs in the Matrix, and she can also restore them. So she kicks his jaw off. This is a reference to what she said about what she wanted to do to her husband, Chad, earlier in the movie, because she subconsciously recognized he was one of her handlers, and she does this now to the analyst. You'll notice that the analyst cannot heal himself from this kick, but Trinity can by snapping her fingers. And it's symbolically very interesting. Actually, my friend Joel pointed this out to me, that she doesn't snap with her middle finger. She snaps with her ring finger, which now has a ring or wedding band presumably on it, representing that the chemical wedding, the alchemical wedding between herself and Neo has occurred, between the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine. This is a very awkward position to snap your fingers from, but that's how she snaps her fingers. And that's clearly very deliberate on the part of the movie makers, that they want to show that this is about the alchemical wedding and that Neo and Trinity are now married, okay, with the ring finger on. And that's what the power of that connection is what she's using to snap her fingers and change the Matrix at her will. Because when she snaps her fingers, the jaw goes back onto the face of the analyst. Very interesting and very powerful allegory there when it comes to even the concept of the alchemical wedding and her snapping her fingers to change things in the Matrix with her ring finger instead of her middle finger. So interesting symbology there. The analyst then says, I'll just continue with the dialogue here. When he says to her, it was all a private joke and amusement, that's all. She kicks his jaw off and then says, kind of like that's a joke and an amusement to me. And then she snaps her fingers and his jaw returns to his face. The analyst then says, if you hated the name Trinity so much, why did you heal like a good little bitch for so long? Totally insulted her, saying it took you a long time to awaken to your true self and come out of the Matrix mentally, and you obeyed me and bought into my illusion that I gave you. And he says, why did you heal and heal like a good little bitch for so long? And immediately Trinity takes out a blade and slashes his throat, across his throat, when he says that to her. And you see code and blood both spilling out of his, Matrix code and blood both spilling out of his throat. So hyper violence in this scene, but symbolically, allegorically representative that Trinity has now come into powers of the one, and she could remake the Matrix as she sees fit, and she could even alter the code of the program of the analyst. And, he's basically bleeding out on the floor, and she snaps her fingers again, and he is able to come back to life. She is able to heal his code, and he's still operating. But he can't do that himself, or at least it would take him a long time to do that himself. Then he says to her, Neo says, yeah, he definitely asked for that. Agreeing with, her doing this type of violence to the analyst. So Trinity snaps his fingers. The analyst comes back to life after having his throat slit. And the analyst looks at Neo and says, "Can't you control her?" And Trinity strikes him in the chest, sending him through the wall. So this is the idea that they're not controlling each other. They're not playing the game of control. She's not in control of him. He's not in control of her. Okay? They're not trying to control them, each other or anyone. They're in control of themselves and their own power inside the Matrix and in the real world. And she slams him through the adjacent wall, and she says to him, "That was for using children," meaning that was for using the children that you gave me in the false reality that you provided me with as my identity in the Matrix to help keep me anchored there. That wasn't right of you to do. You used children to do that. And she says to him, putting him through the wall, "That was for using children." And then finally, in the last few sets of dialogue, pieces of dialogue in the film, it's a very important conversation ensues between the analyst and, of course, Neo and Trinity. Neo says to the analyst, "We have a few questions for you." Trinity then says, "You tried to activate the failsafe," meaning the other version of the Matrix. And he says to her, "Well, no, the suits tried," meaning the higher-ups, programs higher up than himself tried. And he says, "Obviously, without your source code, I knew that that was impossible." Okay? To reboot that other version of the Matrix, they needed the code of the One. And with them being out of the Matrix and that not being there to reboot them, to reboot that original Matrix, that's not going to work because the One plays an important function in the Matrix. And then Trinity asks him, "So why haven't the suits purged you yet?" And here's where the analyst comes in with some more very important dialogue, and it's his finishing dialogue of the film. And here's what he says, and listen very carefully to this, it's very important. He says, "They haven't purged me because I know the system." And this is the idea that the psychologists, the psychiatrists, the media, those who are really manipulators of the mind, right? They know the system and how it works, and they know human beings. He says, "Because I know the system, I know human beings, and I know you." Okay? So he knows how the human psyche works. This is exactly what I have told people. That's what the dark occult is. Ancient dark psychologists, social engineers, dark occultists who know the ins and outs of the human psyche better than anybody, better than people know themselves. And that's what he's saying he is here. He says, "I know the system, I know human beings, and I know you. And right now, you're feeling good about what you've done. You should. It was a victory. Bravo. But now what? You came here to me to negotiate some kind of a deal, just like Neo in the first trilogy went to the machines to try to broker a peace arrangement if he would help to get Agent Smith on the leash for the machines and sacrifice himself in doing so. And in doing so help free, or at least have the machines not continue to press their war on the people of Zion. And, he says to him, "What are you now here to make a deal, some kind of a deal with me?" He said, "You think you hold all the cards because you can now do whatever you want in this world." And he says, "I say, go for it. Remake it. Knock yourselves out. Paint the sky with rainbows for all I care. But here's the thing. The sheeple aren't going anywhere." And this is like him just talking right to the movie audience. He's talking about human beings in our world. He's saying most people are sheeple. They're sheep. They're cowards. They're not going to awaken. They don't want freedom. He says they like my world. They're not going anywhere. They're going to stay in their pods, happy and content as pigs and shit with the illusion I'm feeding them. And they're not going to try to wake themselves up and step into their true power. He says they don't want this sentimentality that you guys represent. They don't want that. They want the boredom and non-originality that I'm force-feeding down their throats every day through the shit I'm giving them and the illusion I'm feeding them. He says they want to be controlled. They don't want freedom or empowerment. They want to be controlled. They don't want freedom. They don't want empowerment. Directly talking about the situation in humanity today. Most people don't want freedom because they don't want the responsibility that goes hand in hand with freedom, and they don't want to make the sacrifice, and they don't want to put the skin in the game that is a requirement for the manifestation of human freedom. Most people in our world want no part of that work at all. They want to stay happy and content in their so-called ignorant bliss. It's not really truly bliss, it's death, but they want to stay in their ignorance because subconsciously they are trying to bargain with creation and say that they want to abdicate the responsibility that goes hand in hand with truly understanding themselves and truly operating in a state of freedom. They want some controller. They want some social engineer. They want Big Daddy. They want to have parents for the rest of their existence. They don't want to become cosmic adults. And they want to stay in the matrix. You know, fed nonsense, fed fantasy, mind controlled, because they believe not knowing and not coming out of it, not caring enough to come out of that false reality and engage in true right action somehow absolves them of their personal responsibility. And it does not. It's just a claim. It never can do that. The analyst finally, in some of his last words in the film, goes on to say, they crave the comfort of certainty, meaning human beings. And that means you too, back in your pods, unconscious and alone, just like them. This is the idea that them even trying to free other people's minds is like them being in a new prison. And it can feel like that sometimes. See, that's what this allegorically represents. You two back in your pods, unconscious and alone, right? Feeling alone in doing this task, just like them. They're alone in their pods. You're alone in your new, quote, pods of you're trying to free minds that don't want to be freed. But see, he's a liar who has always been a liar. He's a deceiver. This is the dark occultist putting out through the New Age movement and through religion. You shouldn't worry about waking other people up and trying to bring their spirituality online. If they choose that, that's their own choice. No, incorrect. It's not only their own choice. That's the false choice, the illusion of choice. Because what they're doing is harming others. You know? They're harming others in staying asleep and allowing this control system to enact its slavery on everyone. Unfortunately, we are all connected spiritually. And if anyone is enslaved, all are enslaved. This is what people who keep thinking this notion, let everybody go, let them stay in the illusion, let them stay in the mind control. They don't want to wake up. You're in the illusion. You're in the mind control. You haven't fully woken up. You don't understand this is the exact mentality of the dark occultist and where they want you. They're feeding you that. To say only care about yourself and don't care about those people. You haven't fully understood the law of one, that there's total connection between us and all others, even those who are asleep. And it is our personal responsibility to wake them up. That is what the second part of the one great work is to do. And guess what? I don't give a shit what occultists in the ancient world said that wasn't what was right to do and wasn't what our mission to do. They were fucking wrong and I'm right. How about that? How about those apples? Let's put it down how it really fucking is. The Hermeticists were wrong and Mark Passio is correct. That's how it really is in real life. That's how it really is when you fully leave the world of fantasy and illusion that these psychopathic, lunatic, dark occultists are feeding you through some of the bullshit ideologies that they came up with in the occult world. And put a poison pill in most of them to get people to latch onto so they'll stand down and take no true right action in the very real world. They'll worry only about what they're doing with themselves. And guess what? That's important. That's one of the most important things. That's the first part, the first half, if you will, of the one great work is bring yourself online. Heal your own traumas. fully wake up spiritually. But guess what? If you think it's not about waking other people up, you didn't do those things. You only claim to do them. And you didn't do them fully. You didn't do them fully enough to step into your own power, as in this allegory Neo and Trinity finally have, and actually start freeing minds. And that's how it really is, boys and girls. Say about it whatever you want. But once again, it will never make what I just said untrue. Get over yourself. Okay? And stop worrying about taking any particular system of occult school of thought as the be-all and end-all. Doesn't matter whether it's Rosicrucianism, Freemasonry, Hermeticism, Thelema, or anything else. They have to be integrated in a total, a way that incorporates them all, bringing the best parts of those into the individual and leaving what doesn't really help us when we remember who we are and what we came here to do. And I'm telling you, there's many, many, many people out there that still can't get that. They still don't understand that. And it's really hurting this movement and holding it back from its true potential. And we're nowhere near where we should be at because many people have bought into that New Age and dark occult bullshit. That in fact, the dark occult interjected into the New Age and into some allegedly light occult systems of thought and philosophy, and they are not any such thing. They are in fact dark occult philosophy from some perspectives, from those poison pill perspectives. And that's where human discernment has to come in. That's where we, as people who are trying to affect things for the better, need to have better discernment. Neo then says, so now the final dialogue takes place between the analyst and Neo and Trinity, and Neo says, we're not here to negotiate things. We don't want to make a bargain or a deal with you at all. Trinity then says, we're on our way to remake your world, right? While they're operating in the real world, going up to, broadcast depth where they hack into the Matrix, they're going to remake the Matrix now and free minds. Neo says, we're going to remind people what a free mind can do. And Trinity says, I forgot, acknowledging, not lying to herself, acknowledging she forgot her true self. She forgot who she was and her true purpose, but she finally remembered it and stepped into her power. She said, I forgot. It's easy to forget. And Neo said, he makes it easy, meaning the dark occult makes it easy for us to get discouraged and forget who we are and what our mission is, and they do. And that's what this whole breakdown allegorically is about. Remembering who we are and what we have to do. Trinity then said that he does. He makes it easy for us to forget who we are. And Neo says that's something he should think about. And Trinity says, before we got started, she says this to the analyst, before we got started, we decided to stop by here to say thank you to you. She says to him, you gave us something that we never thought we could have. And the analyst looks at her and says, and what is that? And her answer is another chance, meaning they were resurrected from the dead, from their spiritual death in the Matrix, where care and right action was deadened. And because of him booting that Matrix, fixing their bodies, booting that Matrix, and allowing them to finally come back to life into the real world, it gave them another chance to go back into the Matrix and free the minds of all the human beings that are still there. And they're going to do that job. They're going to do that one great work. And finally, they fly away out of the analyst's home together into the sky, showing that they both absolutely can fly. And they're holding hands while they do it, representing that sacred union, that alchemical wedding and bond. And that is how the allegory of Matrix 4 Resurrections concludes. And that concludes my decoding of the film. If you enjoyed that, please do check out whatonearthishappening.com, where you can request the ARC drive at whatonearthishappening.com/ARC. And if you want to make a straight donation gifts, or the donation page of What on Earth is Happening. That's all the time we have for this episode of What on Earth is Happening, ladies and gentlemen. Remember, government is slavery, and we'll see you right here next week.